Welcome back to Potter Read. Today's tale, Harry claimed 7 forgotten house lordships at age 8 and shook the Wizengamot to its roots. If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Settle in, let's begin. Chapter 1, The Ledger That Woke Harry Potter kept accounts, not on paper. Paper could be found, and a thing that could be found could be punished. He kept the accounts in his head, where Uncle Vernon's hands did not reach, in neat columns that he balanced every night on the thin mattress in the cupboard under the stairs. On the left side of the ledger went the work: weeding the flower beds 2 hours, scrubbing the cooker until the enamel showed through the grease, buttering Dudley's toast on both sides because Dudley liked it that way and would scream if it was wrong. On the right side went the payment. Most nights the right side stayed empty, and a column that never balanced was, Harry had decided some time ago, a column that told you something true about the people who kept it open. He was 7 years old, 11 months, and a number of days he could have given you to the hour. He was small for his age, which the Dursleys liked, because small boys fit into small spaces and ate small amounts and did not take up room that better people deserved. He wore Dudley's old clothes, which hung on him the way a flag hangs on a still day. His glasses were mended at the bridge with tape gone yellow. None of this was in the ledger. The ledger was only for transactions, and a transaction needed 2 parties who had agreed to a price, and nobody had ever agreed to a price with Harry. Things were simply taken. You could not enter a theft as a sale, no matter how you squinted at it. That morning the column got worse. Aunt Petunia owned a mirror. It had been her mother's, a hand mirror with a silver back gone soft and gray, the glass spotted at the edges like an old apple. She kept it on the hall table where guests could see that the Dursleys were the sort of family that had heirlooms. Harry had been told to dust the hall table, and the hall table had a wobble in its left front leg that nobody had ever fixed because fixing it was work, and the wobble belonged to the table the way the empty column belonged to him. He set the duster down too hard. The table rocked, the mirror walked itself off the edge with the slow inevitability of a thing that has decided, and struck the parquet, and broke into a spray of bright pieces that caught the morning light and threw it back in dozens. For a moment the hall was very quiet. Harry looked at the pieces. He understood the arithmetic of the situation precisely. A broken heirloom was not a chore that could be undone with effort. It was a debt with no top to it, the kind that did not get paid off so much as worked off forever, and he was already working off a great deal. He thought about running, which was useless because there was nowhere in the house that was not the house. He thought about lying, which was useless because Aunt Petunia counted the mirror's absence as exactly as he counted everything else. And then, because none of the useful thoughts were any use at all, he simply wished, very hard and very stupidly, that the mirror would go back to being a mirror. The pieces moved, they did not jump. There was no flash, no bang, nothing a person could later swear to. Shards slid along the parquet toward one another with a faint, glassy whisper, the way water finds the low place in a floor, and they fitted themselves edge to edge, and the cracks ran backward and sealed and thinned to nothing, and the silver poured back across the soft gray back of the thing until it lay whole on the floor, glass side up, showing Harry a small face with green eyes and a thin white scar above one of them looking down. He picked it up. He turned it over. The seam where it had broken was not there. His hands, he noticed, were perfectly steady, which surprised him because the rest of him was not. He set the mirror back on the table, dead center, away from the wobble, and he stood very still and listened to the house, and the house went on with its ordinary noises. The kettle, the television, Dudley somewhere upstairs making a sound like a small machine breaking down. Nobody had seen. That mattered. It went, after a moment's thought, into the part of his head that was not the ledger, the part where he kept the other things, the things that had no price because no one would ever buy them and no one could be made to sell them. The time the school roof had moved him out of the rain when there was no reason for the rain to stop where it stopped. The time his hair had grown back overnight after Aunt Petunia took the kitchen scissors to it. The glass at the zoo that was there and then was not. He did not have a name for the column those things went in. He only knew it was getting longer and that the Dursleys, who noticed everything, took great care to notice none of it, which told him it was the most important column he kept. Boy, he went. Breakfast was served, cleared, and accounted for. Aunt Petunia passed through the hall twice and looked at her mother's mirror and saw nothing wrong with it, because nothing was wrong with it, and Harry stood at the sink with his hands in the gray water and balanced the morning's books. Mirror returned to inventory at no cost. Method unexplained. He let himself feel, for exactly the length of one breath, the particular satisfaction of a sum that came out even when it had no business coming out even at all. Then he let it go because satisfaction was not in the budget either, and there was the cooker to do. The owl came that evening. It was not, at first, an owl that Harry knew was an owl. It was a sound on the kitchen window after dark, a hard, dry tapping like a stick on glass, and when Uncle Vernon yanked the curtain back there was a bird on the sill the color of a wet roof, iron gray, with eyes that did not blink, and a sealed letter held in 1 foot the way a bailiff holds a writ. It tapped again deliberately on the exact spot it had tapped before. "What in blazes?" said Uncle Vernon. Aunt Petunia made a sound that Harry had never heard her make. It came from the back of her throat and had no consonants in it, and she had gone the color of the kitchen tiles, and her eyes had found the bird and would not leave it. Harry, drying the last plate, watched her instead of the owl because his aunt's face was the more interesting document. She knew what the bird was. She had braced in the particular, prepared way of someone who had been told a long time ago that this day might come and had spent every day since deciding it never would. Uncle Vernon opened the window to shoo the thing off, and the owl walked in over the sill on its own legs, calm as a tax inspector, and dropped the letter on the kitchen table, and left the way it had come without being shooed at all. The letter lay there. It was heavy paper, yellowish, and it bore no stamp. The seal on the back was a circle of black wax pressed with a mark Harry could not read from the sink. Vernon picked it up. His face did the thing it did when he was about to be loud, the slow purpling from the collar up. Then he turned it over and read the front, and the purple stopped, and a different expression came in underneath it, the careful blankness of a person reading a number he does not like on a bill he cannot dispute. "Who's it for?" Harry asked. "Cupboard," Vernon said, which was not an answer, and threw the letter into the sink, into the gray water with the plates, where the ink should have run and did not. The water beat it off the paper and left it dry. Vernon looked at the dry letter in the wet sink for a moment. Then he fished it out with the barbecue tongs, holding it at arm's length, carried it to the cooker, and set it alight from the gas ring, and held it over the sink until it had burned down to a curl of black, and dropped the curl and ran the tap on it. He did all of this without speaking. Aunt Petunia watched him do it with her hand flat against her chest. Harry read the front of the letter before it went into the fire. He was good at reading things quickly and upside down and at angles, a skill the cupboard had taught him, because information was the one thing in the house that could not be locked away from a person who paid attention. The letter had not said Mr. H. Potter. It had not said the cupboard under the stairs, 4 Privet Drive. It had said, in a thin, sharp hand that looked older than print, to the unclaimed heir of the sealed account. Harry held the whole shape of it in the front of his mind where he could turn it over. Unclaimed, heir, sealed account. 4 words, and 3 of them were words from his ledger, words about ownership and debt and the keeping of books, and the 4th word was heir, which was a word about being owed something by right of who you were rather than what you did. And Harry had never in his life been owed anything by right of who he was, and a thing that had never happened was, in his experience, a thing worth watching very closely. "Off to bed," said Uncle Vernon in a voice gone strangely even. Now, Harry went to the cupboard. He did not sleep. He lay in the dark and balanced the evening. Asset 1 letter addressed to a person who might be him, claiming the existence of a sealed account. Liability, the letter was ash. He turned the 4 words over until they were smooth. The second owl came at 2 in the morning. He heard it from the cupboard, the same hard dry tapping, the same deliberate spacing, and he heard Uncle Vernon thunder down the stairs and the gas ring catch and the tap run. The 3rd owl came at dawn. By then Vernon had nailed a board over the kitchen window, and the 4th letter came down the chimney into the cold grate, and the 5th was simply there on the doormat at 7, with no owl at all, the house having abandoned the pretense that it could keep the post out. Harry was made to sweep the grate that held the 4th letter. He read it, of course, in the seconds before he was told to burn it, and it said the same 4 words, and below them a single line more which the others had not had. Right of audience is granted to the heir alone. The heir need only ask aloud to be heard. He swept the ash into the pan. He did not ask anything aloud, not yet, because asking aloud in a house with ears was how you got the asking taken away from you. But he held the line in the front of his mind all that morning, the way you hold a coin you mean to spend, and he waited for a room with no one in it. That night there was an argument over him, which was rare, because the Dursleys did not usually consider him worth arguing about. He heard it through the cupboard door, which was thin, and which he had long ago learned to treat as a window that opened on sound instead of light. Uncle Vernon's voice came in heavy slabs. Aunt Petunia's came thin and fast, the words running together at the edges, which was how her voice went when something had got under her guard and she was working not to show it. "Burn every last one, that's what, same as we always." "You don't burn theirs, Vernon, you don't understand. They don't stop, my mother told me. They never ever stop." A pause, a chair dragged. "Then we send him somewhere, boarding, anywhere. Let them post their ruddy letters at someone else's chimney. And have one of them come to the door asking why." Aunt Petunia's voice dropped, and Harry pressed closer to the door, because a voice that drops is a voice carrying the part that matters. "There are rules about him, about the house, about keeping him here. I don't know all of it. Lily knew it. Lily knew everything, didn't she? Lily and her." The word came out of her like a tooth. "Her kind. And it kept her so safe. She's in the ground, so don't you tell me about safe." Harry sat very still in the dark and added a line to the column with no name. Lily. He had a name now, where before there had been only a photograph he was not allowed to ask about, and a feeling, when he asked anyway, of a door closing. Lily knew everything. Lily had been one of them, the people who never stopped, the people who sent owls. Accident that had killed his parents, the drunk driver story that Aunt Petunia recited the way you recite a thing you have decided to believe so hard that believing it becomes a kind of work. That story had a hole in it now, and Harry was very good at holes, because a hole in a story was the place where someone had taken something out and hoped you would not notice the gap in the sum. He decided to be careful. Then he decided to go anyway. Both decisions felt in the dark like the same decision. 300 feet beneath the ordinary city, in a hall that had no windows because it had no need of the surface, a goblin named Griffook stopped walking. He had been carrying a tray. The tray no longer mattered. He set it down on the basalt floor of the long gallery, where the oldest vaults waited behind doors that had not opened in the memory of anything that drew breath, and he stood very still and put one long hand flat against the nearest door and felt it. The doors of the long gallery were not locks. A lock was a wizard's idea, a thing to be picked. These were oaths set into iron by goblinsmiths in the centuries when the bank was young and the families were younger, and an oath could not be picked. It could only be answered. Each of these doors had been sworn to a bloodline, and each of those bloodlines had failed, gone thin and then gone out, until the door stood for nothing but the memory of names, and the ledgers that named them had been ruled by the careful hands of generations of keepers into the long red column titled extinct. A door in the long gallery did not stir. That was the entire point of it. It had nothing left to stir for. This door was warm, not hot, not lit. Warm the way a stone is warm an hour after the sun has left it, the warmth of a thing that has had something put into it and not yet given it back. Griffook took his hand away and looked at the iron and saw the oath runes along the seam doing a thing he had read about and never seen, brightening one by one in a slow procession from the lintel down, as if something on the far side of all that iron had remembered very faintly that it was owed a name. He walked down the gallery. The second door was warm. The 5th, the 11th, he counted as he went, the count rising in him like water in a well, and when he had counted 7 warm doors out of the 400 dead ones, he stopped counting and went, very fast, to find the keeper. Keeper Vardek of the House of Records was old in the way that mountains are old, which is to say he had stopped paying attention to the smaller passages of time some while ago. He sat in a chamber walled floor to ceiling with ledgers, the great brass-bound account books of the bank, and he was reading one of them by the light of a lamp that burned without fuel, and when Griffook told him what he had felt in the long gallery, Vardek did not look up. "You felt warmth in the gallery," he said. 7 doors, keeper. Doors in the gallery do not warm. The bloodlines they answer to are extinct. Extinct is a ruling. A ruling is a thing we made with these hands, and we do not unmake our rulings because a junior felt a draft. He turned a page. The page was very old and made a sound like a dry leaf. "Which 7? Griffook told him the 7. Vardek stopped reading. He sat for a moment with one finger pressed to the line he had been reading, the way a man holds his place when he is about to be called away from his desk for a very long time, and then he closed the ledger and the brass clasp shut with a sound that filled the chamber, and he rose. He was not tall. No goblin was tall. He gave none the less the impression of a thing that the room arranged itself around. "Bring me the master roll of the sealed accounts," he said, "not the working copy, the roll." And when Griffook had brought it, a scroll of vellum as thick as a man's arm, sealed at both ends with the bank's own iron, Vardek broke the seals himself, which keepers were permitted to do and almost never did, and unrolled it across the great desk, and ran his finger down the long red column titled Extinct, and read the 7 names that Griffook had named, and beside each of the 7 names he read the thing that the working copies did not show. Because the working copies were what the wizards were allowed to see, and the roll was what was true. Beside each name in the hand of some keeper 400 years gone was written the date the door had been ruled extinct, and beside each date in a fresher hand in inks of different ages was written a second line that no extinct account should ever have acquired. The 7 dead houses had administrators. Living men were drawing on the vaults of the dead. Vardek read the 7 administrators of record. He read them twice. He was a creature of ledgers, and a ledger kept honestly is a moral document. It records who owes and who is owed, and it does not flinch, and Vardek did not flinch, but something happened behind his face that Griffook had served beside him 40 years and never witnessed, a stillness with iron underneath it. 400 years, Vardek said, these vaults have been bled, quietly, by stewards. The bank logged every withdrawal as the bank logs all things, and the bank said nothing because our law is plain. We do not act for a house against the house's own steward unless the house's heir asks it of us. There has been no heir, there has been no one withstanding to ask. He rolled the vellum closed with hands that were entirely steady. And now 7 doors are warm. An heir, said Griffook, 1 heir, 7 doors. Do you understand what that is? It has not happened in the life of this bank. Vardek looked at the younger goblin, and the lamp that burned without fuel put 2 small flames in his eyes. You see the shape of it, Vardek said. It was not a question. Look at the dates. 7 houses ruled extinct across 200 years, no 2 in the same decade, no 2 by the same keeper. Spread out, patient. A man who wanted to steal 1 seat and feared being caught would steal it slowly. 7 men acting alone would not all have stolen slowly in the same careful way, because they would not have known of one another. This is not 7 thefts. This is 1 theft committed 7 times by hand that learned from each one how to do the next more quietly. He let the roll curl shut. Somewhere above us there is a structure, a pooling. The dead house's voices were not merely silenced, they were collected. Voice that has been collected is a voice that has been cast child year upon year in a chamber where the casting of voices decides who is taxed and who is jailed and who is left alone to do as he pleases. Someone has been voting the dead for 2 centuries. The dead do not complain. That is what makes them the most valuable seats of all. Griffith found his voice. Then the heir is not walking into a question of gold. The gold is the smallest part of it, and the gold is enough to start 3 wars. Vardek set the roll back in its iron cradle and sealed it with his own hand, pressing his thumb to the metal until it took the print and held. No, the heir is walking into the discovery that he alone in one small body is the lawful owner of a block of votes that several very powerful men have spent their whole lives believing belonged to them. They have built houses on those votes, married on them, borrowed against them. The day this child claims what is his, every calculation those men have made comes due at once. The old goblin's eyes did not move. They will offer him friendship first, then money, then a guardian who loves him very much and only wants what is best. And when the friendship and the money and the guardian all fail, as they will, because the doors are calling him and a called heir does not stay bought, they will decide that 7 seats are simpler to manage if the throat that owns them is cut. We have a narrow road to walk, Griffith, between waking him and burying him, and we will walk it carefully, because a bank that loses its only heir in 400 years deserves to be laughed out of the mountain. Find out whose blood walked into the gallery, he said again, quieter. And whoever it is, when they ask to be heard, and they will ask, the oath doors are calling them and they cannot help but ask, make certain the asking reaches my desk before it reaches anyone else's. There are men in this matter who have spent 4 centuries making 7 houses look dead. They will not enjoy being corrected. The room with no one in it came to Harry on the 3rd day in the afternoon, when Dudley had a friend over and Aunt Petunia was performing tea for the friend's mother in the front room and Uncle Vernon was at the works, and Harry had been sent to the back garden to weed, and told not to come in until he was called. He knelt in the flower bed with the smell of turned earth and bruised marigold around him and dirt working in under his nails, and he checked twice that no window held a face. Then he set down the trowel and he said it quietly to the marigolds, the absurdity of it prickling along his neck and saying it anyway, because the cupboard had taught him that the absurd thing was often the only thing left that worked. I want to be heard. Nothing happened for long enough that he picked the trowel back up. Then the garden gate, which Uncle Vernon kept latched and which had a hinge that screamed, opened without a sound. A woman came through it. She was thin and gray-haired and entirely ordinary, a woman you would pass on the pavement and forget in a buttoned coat too warm for June, and she crossed the lawn to where Harry knelt and crouched down to his level with the ease of someone much younger than she looked. And when she smiled, her teeth were not quite a person's teeth, a little too many of them, and each one filed to a discreet point, and Harry understood that the ordinary woman was a costume worn over something that was not ordinary at all. "You asked to be heard," she said. Her voice had a grain in it, like a low note bowed on a thick string. "Gringotts heard. I am sent to carry the heir to audience if the heir consents to be carried. The carrying is lawful. The audience is the heir's right. You may refuse. You may also," she added with a flick of the too many teeth, "weed this bed for the remainder of your natural life, which on present accounting looks to be the alternative on offer." "Who's bleeding the account?" Harry said. The woman went still in the crouch. "What did you ask?" "The letter said a sealed account. Sealed means closed, but you don't send 4 owls in a chimney and a doormat about an account that nobody's touching. You send 4 owls when somebody's been taking money out and somebody else just noticed. So who's been taking it out, and why does it matter that I exist all of a sudden?" He looked at her steadily through the taped glasses. "I'm not getting in anyone's pocket without knowing whose pocket and what's in it." "That's just sense." For a moment the woman did not answer. Then the pointed smile came back wider, and it was not a kind smile, but it had in it the thing a buyer reserves for a seller who has just named the true price of the goods on the table and watched the buyer fail to talk him down. "Keeper Vardek said you would ask the right question," she said, "and he is a creature who is never pleasantly surprised, so do not let it go to your head." She rose and held out a hand that was gray and long-fingered and clawed at the ends. "The answers are at the bank. They are large answers. You will want to be sitting down. Take my hand, heir, and do not let go between here and there, because the road we travel does not forgive a passenger who lets go." Harry looked at the house. A debt with no top to it lived in that house, and a column that never balanced, and an ant who had gone the color of the tiles at the sight of a gray owl. He looked at the clawed hand. Then he wiped the dirt off his own hand onto Dudley's old trousers, which were going to get him shouted at regardless, and he took it. The garden folded shut like a closing eye, and the smell of marigolds was gone, and there was a long dark with cold air rushing past, and a sound under everything like a great slow drum, and Harry kept his grip and did not let go, and counted the drum beats because counting was what he did when there was nothing else to hold, and somewhere around 40 the dark opened out into stone and lamplight and the smell of old metal and older paper. And he was standing on a floor of black basalt in a hall that had no windows because it had never needed any. They did not let him gawp for long, which suited him, because gawping was a way of telling a room you did not understand it, and he meant to understand this one. He had time to register a few facts on the walk. The ceiling went up past where the lamplight reached. The lamps burned with a steady flame and no smoke, and there was nothing in them to burn. The goblins he passed did not look at him the way adults looked at him. They looked at him the way the woman had, evaluating, weighing him as a sum they had not finished adding. A coin lay on the floor near a doorway, and he stepped over it, and one of the goblins said, without turning around, "Wise," and Harry decided he would not be picking up any loose money in this building. The chamber they brought him to was walled in ledgers. Floor to ceiling brass-bound, more books than Harry had known existed, and at a great desk in the middle of them sat the oldest living thing Harry had ever seen, a goblin with a face like a dry riverbed and eyes that did not waste their movement. A lamp burned beside him. A scroll of thick pale vellum lay closed on the desk, sealed at both ends with iron. "Sit," said the old goblin. "I am Vardak, keeper of the House of Records of this bank. You are the blood that walked into my long gallery 3 days ago and woke 7 doors that have been dead since before your country had its present name. Sit down, child, you are going to need the chair." There was a chair. Harry sat in it. His feet did not reach the floor, which he disliked, because feet that did not reach the floor put a person at a disadvantage in a negotiation, and he had already worked out that this was a negotiation even if no one had said so. He sat forward to the edge so that at least his back was straight. "You said 7 doors," Harry said. "7 of what?" "7 lordships." Vardak laid one long finger on the closed scroll. "I will use small words, not because you are small, but because the matter is large, and large matters are best carried in small words. In the world your aunt and uncle have worked so hard to keep from you, there is magic. You have felt it. You mended a mirror 3 days past, did you not, and told no one? Do not look startled. The bank keeps better accounts than you do, and the mirror is in our ledger now beside your name." The dry mouth moved in something not quite a smile. "There is a wizarding people hidden inside the ordinary one. It is governed in part by a council of old families called the Wizengamot. Each old family that holds a seat upon it holds a voice and a vote in the law of that whole hidden world. Are you with me?" "Old families have votes," Harry said, "like the House of Lords." "Better read than I expected. Yes, like that, and worse than that, because there is no other house above it to check what it does. Now, some of those old families are alive and loud, and some went thin and went out, and their seats were ruled extinct, and their vaults sealed, and their voices were supposed to fall silent forever." Vardak's finger pressed down on the scroll. 7 such families went out. The bank ruled them dead with these hands. And every one of them, child, ran in the end into a single thread of blood that has been hiding under a cupboard in Surrey, drinking warm milk and balancing accounts that no one would let it close. Harry sat very still. The chair was too big, and his feet did not reach the floor, and the oldest creature in the world had just told him that 7 dead families ended in him, and the part of his mind that kept the ledger went straight to work, because work was what it did when everything else was too big to hold. "That's not possible," he said. 7 families don't end in one person by accident. That's too many. 1 maybe, if your gran was the last of something. But 7 means somebody was marrying somebody on purpose, over and over, for a long time, to keep all of it pointing at the same place. Either that, or it's a lie, and you're about to tell me I have to sign something." The lamp put 2 small flames in Vardak's eyes, and the dry mouth moved again, whiter this time. "Griffhook," the keeper said to the younger goblin standing by the door, "the road did not break him and the chair did not break him, and now he has told me in his second minute that the truth I am about to show him is suspiciously convenient. Make a note, the bank may finally have an heir worth the ink." He turned back to Harry. "You are correct on both counts, and that is what makes this dangerous. It is not an accident. Marriages were arranged quietly across centuries to gather 7 thin bloodlines into one strong one, and then that one was hidden so well that even its keeper, he meant himself, Harry, caught it, ruled it dead. As for the lie, I cannot make you trust a ledger you have not read, so I will not ask you to. I will let your own blood read it for you, and you will decide whether to believe yourself." He unrolled the scroll. It was empty. Pale vellum, blank end to end, save for 2 lines of writing at the top in a hand older than print, to be read in blood. "The heir alone may open it, the heir alone may close it." "There is a price to knowing," Vardak said, and his voice had changed, gone formal, the cadence of a creature reciting a thing that mattered. 3 drops, no more. The quill will take no more, and it will take no less. It will not hurt beyond the prick. It cannot lie, and it cannot be made to lie, which is precisely why the men who have been drinking from your vaults would give a great deal to ensure this parchment is never read. Once it is read, you will know your 7 names and your 7 vaults and the 7 living men drawing on the dead. And once you know, he said, you cannot stop knowing, and they cannot let you walk back to your cupboard and forget, because a child who knows is more dangerous to them than a child who can be quietly left under a staircase. I tell you this plainly because I do not trade with people I have lied to, even when they are 8 years old and their feet do not reach my floor. Do you understand the price?" Harry looked at the blank parchment. He thought about the column that never balanced and the empty right-hand side of every page he had kept since he was old enough to keep one. He thought about the 4 words on the letter: unclaimed, heir, sealed, account. He thought about how a person who had never been owed anything by right of who he was might want very badly to find out that he had been wrong about that, and how wanting a thing very badly was exactly the condition in which people signed papers they should not sign. "You're telling me to be careful," Harry said. "You keep telling me. Why? You want me to read it. You came and got me. If I read it and it's true, you get an heir who can let you go after the men who have been bleeding the accounts, and that's good for the bank, isn't it? You don't get to do anything about them until I ask, so you want me to read it more than I do." He looked up at the dry old face. "So why do you keep warning me off?" Silence in the chamber of ledgers. Griffook, by the door, had gone entirely motionless. "Because," said Vardak slowly, "a tool that does not understand it is being used breaks in the hand, and I do not want a broken tool. And because," the finger lifted from the scroll, and for just a moment the formality went out of his voice and something nearer to truth came in, "I have ruled 400 houses dead in my time at this desk, child, and 7 of them were not dead, and I did not know it, and a keeper who rules wrongly owes a debt he cannot pay back to the dead. But there is a living heir. To you I can pay it. I would rather pay it to someone who walked into it with his eyes open than to someone I tricked through the door. That is not kindness. Goblins do not deal in kindness. It is accounting. I prefer my books to balance, and a debt paid to a man who did not understand what he was owed is a debt half paid, and I have had enough of half things." He pushed the quill across the desk. It was black and thin and had no inkwell because it did not need one. "3 drops, or the door behind you is open, and the road runs both ways, and you may go back to your marigolds, and I will rule these 7 dead a second time and mean it. Choose." Harry did not pick it up yet. "One more question," he said. "You said I have to ask before the bank can move against the men who have been bleeding the vaults. So the bank's been watching them steal for 400 years and writing it all down and doing nothing because the rules say you can't act without an heir. Fine. But that means the rules matter more to you than the money. So tell me what the rules say happens to the men. Do they go to prison or do they just have to give it back?" Vardak's finger stilled on the desk. "That," he said, "depends on which of them and on what they did, and on whether the world your blood is about to walk into still believes in its own laws or only in who is holding them. Some of the 7 took your vaults by an honest mistake in an old ruling, others forged. Forgery is theft with a quill, and the quill makes it worse, not better, because it means a man sat down with time to reconsider and chose the crime twice. The honest ones will repay. The forgers," the dry mouth did not smile now, "the forgers will discover that a debt to a goblin does not expire when a wizard would prefer it to, and that we are exceedingly patient, and that patience in a creature that outlives 3 of your generations is not a virtue. It is a weapon." Harry picked up the quill. It was lighter than it looked and colder, and it sat in his fingers the way the trowel sat, like a tool that had a job and expected you to know it. He turned his left hand over. The skin of his fingertip was rough from the cooker and the weeding, and he thought with the clear part of his mind that watched him even when the rest of him was busy, that it was a strange thing to have lived 8 years and have your whole life turn on a fingertip you had used for nothing but other people's work. "3 drops," he said, "and then I know, and then you know." He set the point of the quill to his finger and pressed. The prick was nothing less than a thorn in the flower bed. A bead of red came up dark in the lamplight, and the quill drank it without being asked, the way the owl's eyes had not blinked, with a calm and total attention. 1 drop, the blank vellum where it lay before him, shivered. A second bead. 2 drops, and a line of warmth ran up Harry's arm from the fingertip. Not pain, something older than pain, a recognition, the feeling of a key that has found, after a very long time in the dark, the exact lock it was cut for. A third bead, 3 drops. The quill set itself down on the desk. On the blank parchment in the center, a single word began to write itself in his own blood, the letters drawing themselves out in a hand that was not his hand and not Vardak's hand, a hand that no living thing had used in 400 years, sharp and thin and certain. Harry leaned forward to read it as it formed, his feet swinging clear of the floor, the lamp steady, the chamber silent, the 7 doors of the long gallery far below them warming one by one in the dark. The word the parchment wrote was a name, and as Harry read it, in the room at the heart of the bank where the books did not lie, a thing rose out of the surface of the desk in front of him that had not been there a moment before. A ring, plain and old and heavy, turning slowly in the air over the vellum, catching the light and holding it, waiting, the way the empty right-hand column of a ledger waits for someone to finally write something true in it. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, 7 names in blood. The first name had finished writing itself before Harry understood that it was only the first. "P-V-E-R-E-L-L," said the parchment, in letters the dark red-brown of dried blood, and under the word the ring hung in the lamplight turning on nothing, and Harry was still reading the word when the quill, lying where it had set itself down, twitched once and went back to work without being told. A second name unrolled beneath the first, then a third. The blood that had been 3 drops on a rough fingertip spent itself across the vellum in a hand 4 centuries dead, and Harry stopped trying to read each name as it came and simply watched the column grow, because a column was a thing he knew how to read whole. When the quill stopped for good there were 7. P-V-R-E-L-L, Gamp, F-A-W-L-E-Y, A-S-H-G-O-W-N, W-I-L-L-T, S-A-Y-R-E, C-A-R-A-D-O-C. 7 names and 7 rings turning over the desk in a row, no two alike. One was iron so old it had gone the color of a storm. One was pale gold with a green stone sunk flush into the band so that it would not catch on anything, the ring of someone who worked with his hands. One had no stone at all and a single line cut around it, plain to the point of rudeness. Harry counted them twice because counting twice was free and being wrong was not, and both times there were 7, and both times the answer felt too large for the chair he was sitting in. 7, he said. You said 7. I half thought you were rounding up. Goblins do not round. Vardek had not moved from behind the desk, but something in the set of him had changed, the way a held breath changes a room before anyone lets it out. Look at the parchment, not the rings. The rings are only the receipt. The parchment is the account. Harry looked. Below the 7 names the blood had gone on writing, and it had drawn a tree, though not a tree like the ones in the picture books at school, with a king at the top and his children spreading down. This tree grew the wrong way. 7 separate roots ran down the parchment from 7 separate names and bent toward one another as they went, crossing, marrying, braiding, until all 7 came together at the bottom in a single line, and the single line ran down to a single name at the very foot of the page, freshly written, the ink of it still wet enough to shine. The name at the bottom was his. I'd like you to tell me how to read it, Harry said, before I decide how I feel about it. I don't trust how I feel about things I don't understand yet. Griffook by the door made a sound that in a less serious creature might have been a laugh, a wise order of operations. Vardek set one claw to the top of the page to PVRELL and began. Each of these was a house, not a family only. A house holds a seat upon the Wizengamot, which means a house holds a vote, which means a house holds a piece of the law itself. When the last of a house dies with no heir, the seat is supposed to be sealed and the vote retired, and the world is supposed to grow that much quieter. 7 houses went quiet. The parchment says they did not die. It says they hid. It says that for 300 years and more, the heads of these 7 houses arranged for their children to marry the children of the others, deliberately in secret, narrowing 7 streams into one, so that if the worst came and they were hunted to the edge of the world, everything they were would survive in a single carrier who could be hidden where no one would think to look for greatness. The claw came to rest at the bottom of the page on the wet name. They hid it in you. They hid it so well that the bank itself signed 7 death certificates and believed them. Do you understand what I am telling you? You are not the heir to a house. You are the place 7 houses agreed to put themselves for safekeeping, and then the lock closed, and everyone who knew the combination died, and the safe has been sitting under a staircase in Surrey being told it is worthless. The lamp burned without smoke. Somewhere below, the slow boom of the deep wards came up through the floor and went out. Tell me the 7, Harry said, all of them, what each one is and who's been using it while I wasn't here to stop them. Start at the top and don't skip the boring parts. The boring parts are usually where the theft is. Vardek looked at him for a moment longer than the question required. Then he began to read, and Griffook brought a second working scroll and laid it open, and the 2 goblins took Harry through his inheritance the way a surgeon takes a student through a body, naming each part and what it did and where it had been cut. PVRELL, Vardek said, the oldest, older than the bank, which is a thing I do not say lightly because the bank does not enjoy being younger than anything. In the Wizengamot it holds what is called the first voice. The Lord of Peveril speaks before all others, and when a vote ends in a tie, the Peveril vote breaks it. One seat that speaks first and decides last. There is no piece of power in that chamber more feared, and for 400 years it has been held in abeyance. Abeyance, Harry repeated. That's a word that's working hard. What does it actually mean? It means a seat whose owner cannot be found is not retired but set aside, and its vote is held in trust by the office of the chief warlock to be cast for the good of the body until an heir appears. Vardek's voice did not change. It was the not changing that made Harry pay attention. The current chief warlock has held the first voice in trust for some years. He is a man of considerable reputation. His name is Albus Dumbledore. Harry turned the name over. It meant nothing to him. He had never heard it, and that he thought was itself a piece of data, because a name that decided whether ties were broken in the government of a whole hidden people ought to have reached even a cupboard if anyone had wanted it to. Has he been voting it? He asked. The first voice, has he used it? Sparingly, and always the record shows for ends he believed were good. A pause. I do not accuse him of greed, child. I have read his ledger. He does not bleed your vault for gold. The Peveril endowment is nearly untouched, which makes him the single honest steward of the 7, and the most dangerous, because a thief who wants your money will eventually be satisfied, and a man who has decided he is your better will not. Next, said Harry, Gamp, the claw moved down, a house of lawmakers. Holds a seat on the Committee of Ancient Statute, which is the body that decides what the old laws mean when they are quoted, and it holds the right to call a census of the chamber, which is to say the right to make every lord prove he is who he claims and that his vote is his to cast. A house built to keep the others honest. It has been held these 6 generations by the line of Selwyn. Held how? Bought, you would think. Most of them were bought. This one was married. Vardek drew the working scroll closer. The last true daughter of Gamp was wed to a younger Selwyn son in a ceremony that the records say produced no issue and ended in her early death. The Selwyns claimed the seat as her widower's inheritance. The parchment in front of you, he said, tapping the braided roots, says her line did produce issue, a child sent away and hidden in the great narrowing, and that the marriage was never consummated as a marriage but staged as a theft, a way to put a Selwyn hand on a Gamp seat and dress a theft as a death in the family. Lord Cassius Selwyn holds that seat today. He is old and loud and frightened in the particular way of men who have spent their whole lives being told they matter and have begun to suspect it was a clerical error. You don't like him. I have no feelings about wizards. I have an excellent memory of them which they routinely mistake for feelings. The claw moved on. FAWLEY, a house of healers and warders. It holds a senior vote in the administration of the Mediwizard levy, which is a tax, child, a real one, a stream of gold that flows every year from every apothecary in every ward in the country, and it is large, and it has not flowed to the folly vault in a very long time. It flows instead to the holder of the folly seat by a document called an escheat, a paper that says a house died heirless and its property reverts to the crown, and then a second paper that says the crown granted it onward. We have both papers. We have studied both papers. One of them is a forgery, and not a clever one, the kind of forgery a man commits when he is certain no one withstanding will ever read it. Who? Said Harry. Lucius Malfoy. The name meant nothing to Harry either, which he was beginning to find useful, the way a blank check is useful. He had no opinions to get in the way of the arithmetic. So that one's just stealing, he said. Gold, a tax. He forged a paper to take a tax that should have come to my house, and he's been collecting it for years. That one is just stealing, yes, in the sense that the sea is just water. Lucius Malfoy is not a man who steals one thing. He is a man who builds, and the folly levy is a brick in a wall, and we will come to the wall. Vardek's claw did not pause. ASHGOWN, a small house by the measure of these, but an old one, wardsmiths from the border country, the people who set the stones that keep the cold and the curses out of the great old halls. It holds a vote in a thing called the warder's toll, a fee on every ward laid in the kingdom. Modest, steady. The kind of income a careful man would not notice was missing, and a hungry one would never let go. He turned the working scroll. It was not forged or married, it was bought. After the house went quiet, its dormant rights were sold at the archive as a lapsed parcel, for a sum that would embarrass a fishmonger, to a merchant lord named Ambrose Burke, of the Burkes who keep the shop in Knockturn Alley that buys what should not be sold. He paid almost nothing for it because everyone agreed it was worth nothing, a dead house's leavings. He has made it back 10,000 times. He bought it, Harry said slowly, at the archive, openly, so he might not even know it was wrong. He might just think he got a bargain. Vardek's eyes moved to him. Why does that matter to you? Because you can't fight all of them the same way if they're not all the same. Harry put his hand flat on the edge of the desk, the gesture of a person steadying a thing that would not hold still on its own. Selwyn married a lie. Malfoy forged a paper. Those are people who knew. But a man who bought a parcel at a sale and got told it was legal, he's a thief like the others on the books, but he's a different problem, because he can be shown he's wrong, and the others can only be caught. If I treat the one who can be reasoned with like the ones who can't, I make an enemy I didn't have to make, and I lose the one of them who might actually hand back what's mine without a war. That's not kindness. You keep telling me goblins don't do kindness. It's just not wasting a man you could use. For the second time, Griffook made the sound that was not quite a laugh. Keep that thought, Vardek said. You will need it. WLLT. The claw came down on the fifth name, the plain ring with the single cut line. This one is not gold at all, and it is the one that the men above us would least like to see used, though most of them have forgotten it exists, which is precisely how they like it. The House of Wilt holds no great vote and no great tax. It holds a privilege. It is called the Law Speaker's demand. The Lord of Wilt, or his sworn voice, may rise in the chamber at any time and require that any law, however old, be read aloud in full from the true record before any vote that touches it may proceed. And while it is being read, the chamber is frozen. Nothing moves. No deal can be struck in the dark because the lights are on and the oldest law in the kingdom is being read into the silence, and every lord must sit and listen to it. Harry was quiet for a moment. That's a break, he said. On a runaway, you pull it and everything stops and everybody has to look at what's actually written down. That is exactly what it is. Now ask me where it has been. Where has it been? Buried. Vardek said the word with a particular flatness. Not held by a lord, not bought or married. Buried in the archive of the Wizengamot itself, by the clerks who keep the records, because a law speaker's demand cannot be answered if no one can find the true record, and the true records are kept by the clerks, and a clerk who buries the one privilege that could force him to produce a law he has hidden is a clerk who never has to produce it. The chief of those clerks is a careful little man named Odo Prickluil, and he has spent his career making certain that the break on the runaway is welded shut and painted the color of the wall. The lamp burned, the deep boom came and went. Two left, Harry said. Sayari, the claw moved. A house that the world believes emigrated across the sea and died out among strangers. The world is half right. They emigrated. They did not all die. A daughter came home and married into the narrowing, and the seat she should have carried was ruled extinct in her vote. And hold this part carefully, child, because it is the center of everything. Her vote was not retired. It was pooled. Pooled, Harry said. With what? With the others like it. Vardek laid both claws flat on the desk now, the gesture of a creature putting all its cards down at once. There is a thing in the Wizengamot that has no name on any official roll, and the lords who belong to it call it among themselves the convocation. When a house is ruled extinct, its vote does not simply vanish. It becomes what the rules call a vacant ancient suffrage, and vacant suffrages, by a custom 3 centuries deep, are administered together, cast as a block, by a standing committee of senior lords who are trusted to vote them for the good of the body. Do you hear the phrase again? For the good of the body, it is the same phrase the chief warlock uses for the first voice. It is the phrase men reach for when they wish to hold a thing that is not theirs and feel clean about it. His voice went quiet and very precise. The convocation votes the dead. It has voted the dead for 200 years. On any given day, the living lords of that chamber number perhaps 50, and the convocation can put forward a dozen votes that belong to corpses, and a dozen votes is the difference between a law passing and a law dying every time on every question that matters. They did not steal 7 seats for the gold. They stole the seats because seats are votes and votes are the thing itself. Heir is one brick in that wall, so when it is voted as a vacancy, is Peveril. So is every dead house in the kingdom. You are not the heir to a fortune, you are the heir to the majority. Harry did not say anything for long enough that Griffook shifted his weight. And the last one, Harry said finally, Caradoc, Caradoc. Vardek's claw came to rest on the iron ring the color of a storm. A war house, Welsh, old, hard. It holds the Lord's levy, which is the right to raise wards and emergency powers in time of war, the right to say to the whole kingdom, the enemy is at the gate, and these ordinary protections are suspended until he is thrown back. A dangerous right, a necessary one. In the last war it was suppressed. By the enemy, by the ministry. Vardek let that sit. When the Dark Lord was at his height and the kingdom had its back to the wall, the men who governed found it convenient that no single house should hold the power to declare or end an emergency, because an emergency, properly managed, is the most profitable weather a government can have. They created a temporary office to hold the Caradoc levy and stewardship for the duration of the crisis. The crisis is over. The Dark Lord fell the night your parents died. Yes, child, we will come to that, but not yet. You are not ready and neither am I, and the office that was created for the duration of the crisis has not been dissolved. It is called the Office of Wartime Continuance, and it still holds your warhouse's power, and it still renews the emergency every year on the recommendation of a committee for the good of the body. For the good of the body, Harry said. You are learning the language. That is the 7th. 7 houses, 3 thieves who knew exactly what they did, Selwyn, Malfoy, and the clerk Prickluil. One who may not have, Burke, 1 steward who believes himself a saint, Dumbledore, and 2 thefts so large and so old they no longer have a single owner, only a committee, the convocation, and the office. That is the board. You asked me not to skip the boring parts. I have not. Now you know where the theft is. It is everywhere. It is the floor. Harry sat with his too large chair and his feet off the floor and 7 rings turning slowly in front of him, and he did the thing he always did when a sum came out far larger than he had any way to pay, which was to break it into pieces small enough to lift. Okay, he said, I want to make sure I have it. Tell me if I'm wrong, because I'd rather be wrong now and right later. He held up 1 finger. Peveril, the big one, speaks first, breaks ties. Dumbledore's holding it, and he's not a crook, he's worse, he thinks he's doing me a favor. A 2nd finger. Gamp makes people prove their votes are real. Selwyn's holding it on a fake marriage. A 3rd. Folly attacks real money. Malfoy forged a paper to take it. A 4th. Ashton, a smaller fee. Burke bought it at a sale and might think it's legit. A 5th. Wilt, the break. The clerks buried it so nobody can pull it. A 6th. Heir. A vote pooled into this convocation thing that's been voting dead people for 200 years to win every close call. His thumb last, Caradoc, the war power. The ministry took it during the last war and never gave it back, and they keep the war going on paper so they don't have to. That is the board, Vardek said again, and this time there was something underneath the flatness that Harry could not name and did not try to. You held 7 thefts in your head from a single hearing and gave them back to me sorted by kind. I have trained clerks for 40 years who could not do it in a week. It's just bookkeeping, Harry said. Everybody acts like power is complicated, so you won't notice it's mostly just keeping track of who owes what and refusing to forget. He looked up. So what's the bank's piece? You didn't drag me down a road of dragons because you felt sorry for a kid in a cupboard. You said it yourself, you don't do kindness. You've got skin in this. I want to know what it is before we go any further, because a partner whose reasons you don't know isn't a partner. He's a surprise waiting to happen. It was Griffook who answered, which Harry noted, because the senior creature letting the junior speak was a choice, and choices were information. The bank is a fiduciary, Griffook said. He came forward from the door and stood at the corner of the desk, and up close his eyes were the color of old pennies. Do you know the word? It means you hold somebody else's money and you're supposed to look after it like it's theirs and not yours. It means more than that to us. To a wizard, fiduciary is a duty. To a goblin it is a debt, and a debt is a sacred thing, the most sacred thing, more sacred than blood, because blood is an accident and a debt is a promise. We held 7 vaults in trust for 7 houses. We swore when those vaults were made to keep them whole for the line. We failed, not through theft, for we took nothing, but through ruling. We ruled the lines dead, and once a line is ruled dead our oath sleeps, and while our oath slept, men we had no standing to stop reached into vaults we had sworn to guard and took what was inside year on year, and we recorded every withdrawal and we did nothing, because the rules we lived by would not let us act for a house against the house's own steward of record without the word of the house's heir. He let that settle. There has been no heir for 400 years. There is one now. The instant you claim, our oath wakes. The instant our oath wakes, every gold piece taken from those 7 vaults becomes a debt owed to a living house that the bank is sworn to collect. We do not want your gratitude, heir. We want our oath discharged. We have carried a broken promise for 4 centuries, and it sits in our books like a stone, and you are the only creature alive who can let us set it down. Harry looked from Griffith to Vardak and back. So you need me to claim, he said, so you can go after the men who emptied my vaults, because their debt to me is also your broken promise, and you can't fix your promise until I'm real. Yes, and once I claim, those men know I exist, and the whole thing Vardak said happens: friendship, money, a guardian, and then a knife. He said it without drama, like someone reading out a total. So claiming is the thing that saves your honor and the thing that puts me in the ground. You need me to do the exact thing that's most dangerous for me. That's a conflict of interest, a big one. The chamber was silent. It is, said Vardak. I will not pretend it is not. I told you at the start I do not deal with people I have lied to. Here is the truth entire. The bank's interest and your safety point in opposite directions at the moment of claiming, and after that moment they point the same way forever, because a living, claimed, protected heir is worth infinitely more to us than a dead one, and an heir who has murdered the weak he claims is a catastrophe that would be told about in the mountain for 1,000 years as the time the bank woke its only heir in 4 centuries and let him be killed inside a fortnight. Our honor does not survive that. So our interest is not merely that you claim, it is that you claim and live. We will spend to keep you alive what we would spend on no wizard who ever drew breath, because you are the discharge of our oldest debt, and we protect our debts the way your kind protects its children, which is to say better, because we never forget which ones are ours. Then we should write that down, Harry said. Both goblins went still. Write what down? Said Vardak. All of it. What I do, what you do, what happens if you don't, what happens if I don't. You keep telling me a promise is sacred to you and a debt is a promise. Fine, then I want it as a debt. I claim, and in exchange the bank swears, properly, the way you mean it and not the way wizards mean it, to defend me until I'm grown, to come after my gold, and to never once decide for my own good that it knows better than me what I want. He looked at Vardak steadily. Because that's the trap, isn't it? That's the whole story you just told me. 7 houses got eaten by people who decided, for the good of the body, that they knew better. Dumbledore's doing it right now with the big seat. I'm 8. Everyone in this is going to spend the next 10 years telling me to sit down and let the grown-ups handle it for my own good, and most of them will even mean it. I'd like at least one party in the room to be legally unable to. Vardak looked at him for a long moment. Then he did something Griffith had not seen him do in 40 years of service. He laughed, a short, dry sound like 2 stones knocked together, and there was nothing cruel in it. You wish to bind the bank, he said, in the same chains you expect from everyone else. You have understood the disease and prescribed the cure in the same breath, and the cure is a contract, which is the one language in which a goblin cannot refuse a fair offer without dishonor. He drew a fresh sheet of vellum toward him and uncapped a different quill, an ordinary one this time, with an inkwell. We will write it down, every word, and you will read every word slowly, and you will argue the ones you do not like, because a contract a child signed without arguing is a contract a court can break, and I do not intend this one to be breakable. Sit closer. Your feet still do not reach the floor, but your name is going on a document that several powerful men would kill to keep blank, and that is a thing no chair can change. They wrote it down. Harry argued 4 clauses and won 3. The one he lost because Griffith showed him, patiently, why the wording he wanted would let the bank's enemies trap it into breaking faith without meaning to, and he conceded the moment he saw it. Vardak made a note in the margin in the goblin's own script, sharp angles like a row of held knives. When it was done, there were 2 copies. Harry signed both with the ordinary quill, his name small and careful at the foot of a document that promised him an army and an accountant and a wall of patient creatures who would never, ever forget what he was owed. Vardak signed in the goblin script and then pressed his thumb to the iron seal until it took, and the seal flared once, the color of the lamp, and Harry felt the warmth of it run up his arm the way the blood quill's recognition had, only steadier, the warmth of a promise that intended to be kept. Harry set the quill down and squared the edges of his copy against the desk, because squaring edges was a thing his hands did while the rest of him decided what to ask next. There was a question he had been carrying since the kitchen, since his aunt said the word safe like it was a curse, and it had grown heavier through the whole afternoon of names and thefts, and now that he had a contract that forbade the bank from lying to him, he meant to spend it. "Who decided I'd live in the cupboard?" he said. The two goblins looked at each other. It was a small thing, that look, two creatures who did not waste motion choosing for a moment which of them would speak, and Harry watched it as he watched everything, and learned from it that the answer was going to be one he had been protected from on purpose. "The bank holds the Potter estate," Vardek said. "Not among your 7. The Potters are no forgotten house. They are loud and living and very much on the roll, and you are their son before you are anything older. When your parents died, their vault passed into trust for you, and with it their papers, and among their papers was a will." He drew a thinner ledger from a stack at his elbow and opened it to a page marked with a strip of red. "James and Lily Potter wrote a will, child, and lodged a copy with us, as careful people do. It names who should raise you if they could not. It names in order a man called Sirius Black, and then a woman called Alice Longbottom, and then a list of others, and at no point on that list in any position does it name your mother's sister or the house in Surrey. The will is explicit. They wrote in their own hands that you were not under any circumstances to be given to Petunia Dursley." The lamp burned, the boom came up through the floor and went. "Then why am I there?" Harry said. "Because the will was never read." Vardek's voice did not rise. It went, if anything, quieter, which Harry had already learned was the dangerous direction. "A will must be opened and executed before witnesses by its executor. The executor named on the Potter will is the chief warlock of the Wizengamot in his office, which is ordinary. Great families often name the highest seat as a neutral hand. The night your parents died, that office sealed the will pending review. The review was never held. No guardianship hearing was ever convened, though the law plainly requires one for the heir of a noble house. No court ever placed you. You were carried to that doorstep on a single warrant signed by one man for your protection, and there you have remained unread and unheard for as long as you can count." He turned the thin ledger so Harry could see the seal at the foot of the page, a phoenix worked in wax. "The same man who holds your first voice in abeyance is the one who sealed your parents' last wishes and chose the cupboard over the people they begged would take you. I do not tell you this to wound you. I tell you because the contract you have just signed forbids me to leave it out, and because you asked, and because you are going to meet him, and a person should know before he shakes a hand, whose signature is on the warrant that built his childhood." Harry was quiet for a while. He did not cry, which he had stopped doing some years ago on the grounds that it changed nothing and cost salt. He turned the fact over like a coin, looking for the milled edge that told you whether it was real. The one at the top who broke ties and spoke first, the saint who did not steal gold. Read or refused to read a piece of paper in which his dead parents had written "please, not her," and had then done the one thing they asked him not to, and had called it protection, and had been so certain he was right that he had not troubled to hold the hearing that might have told him he was wrong. "For the good of the body," Harry said. "For your protection," Vardek corrected. He would not use the other phrase for this. "This one he believes." "That's worse," Harry said. "I told you it was worse." He squared the edges of the contract one more time and stopped fidgeting, which both goblins noted, because a child who goes still has usually finished deciding something. "I'm not going to do anything about it today. I can't. I'm 8 and I haven't claimed anything, and if I go shouting that the most trusted man in your world buried my parents' will, I'm a liar with no proof who gets quietly sent somewhere quiet. But you'll keep the will. You'll keep it where he can't reach it. And one day, when I've got a seat and a voice and somewhere to stand, I'm going to ask for it to be read out loud in the room with everyone listening, and he's going to have to sit there while they read the part that says not her." He looked up. "That's not revenge. I want to be clear with you about that for the ledger. It's just the hearing they were owed. Somebody should hold it. It might as well be the person it was about." "It will be kept," Vardek said, and closed the thin ledger and set it apart from the others in a drawer that locked with a sound like a small verdict. "Now," he said, capping the quill, "the contract binds us from this moment, but it binds us to defend an heir, and you are not yet an heir. You are a child with 7 names in his blood and 7 rings he has not touched. The contract's protections rise to their full only when you have claimed at least the first seat, because only a claimed lord can be a lord we are sworn to defend. There is a step between the promise and the protection, and it is the step that cannot be done for you, and it is dangerous, and it is the reason I have been careful with you since the door." "The rings," Harry said, "the rings." Vardek rose and came around the desk, which he had not done before, and he stood beside Harry's too large chair so that for the first time they were looking at the rings from the same side, the side of the people who meant to take them. "A house ring is not jewelry," he said. "It is the house. When the smiths made these in the years when oaths were set into iron, they bound into each ring the whole memory of the line. Every lord who ever held it, every oath he swore, every law he wrote, every betrayal he committed or suffered. To put one on is not to receive a gift, it is to be read. The ring reaches into the one who claims it and looks for the line. If the line is there, the ring knows its lord and opens to him, and the seat is his. If the line is not there, if a pretender, a thief, a man who forged a paper and grew bold should put it on, the ring looks and finds nothing of the house, and it does to him what a house does to those who try to steal it, which is not gentle and which I will not describe to a child because you do not need the picture to understand the price. Harry looked at the 7 rings. So when I put one on, he said, it checks if I'm really the heir. And if your blood test was wrong or somebody faked it or I'm not who the parchment says, it kills me. It does not kill the true heir. The parchment cannot be faked. You watched it written in your own blood. It read your line and the line was there. But the parchment tells you that you are of the blood. The ring asks something else. The ring asks whether you are worthy to carry what the blood carries, and that is not a question of ancestry. It is a question the house puts to you directly in its own way, and no 2 houses ask it alike, and I cannot tell you the question because I do not know it, because I am not of your blood, and the ring would no more speak to me than to a stone. He looked down at Harry. I have brought you to this, and I cannot cross it with you. That is the truth I have been carrying since the garden. Everything until now I could do for you. This you do alone, and if I have misjudged you, if there is some rot in the line I could not read, it ends here in this chamber, with me having woken you only to watch a house refuse you. I do not like it. I am telling you I do not like it because you said a partner whose reasons you don't know is a surprise waiting to happen, and I will not be a surprise to you. Choose your first ring, or choose to wait, or choose to walk away and be a child who is merely poor instead of one who might be dead. I have laid it out entire. The choosing is yours, as the law and my oath both agree it must be. Harry looked at the 7 rings for a long time. He thought about Privet Drive, where every choice that mattered had been made above his head and handed down already decided, and about how strange it was that the most dangerous creature he had ever met had just spent an afternoon refusing, on principle, to decide for him. He thought about the word worthy, and how he did not know if he was, and how nobody who actually was worthy ever seemed certain of it, which was either comforting or the exact trap that got fools killed. Then he reached out and took the first ring, the plain one with the single cut line, not Peveril, not the big one, the one everyone would be watching, Wilt, the break. The one that, if it accepted him, would let him stop a runaway and force the whole chamber to sit and listen while the truth was read into the silence. Why that one? Griffook asked, and he meant the question. Because if I'm going to find out a house can kill me, Harry said, turning the plain ring over in his fingers, feeling the cold of it in the single line, I'd rather find out from the smallest one first. And because if it works, the others will hear about it the moment I claim the big seat, and when they do, the first thing they'll try is to make all of this go away on a technicality before anyone has to look at it. I want the break in my hand before they know I'm reaching for the wheel. He looked up at Vardek. You said no 2 houses ask alike, so this one's going to ask me something. What happens if I get the answer wrong? I do not know, Vardek said. I told you I cannot hear the question. Then I'll tell you what it asks after, Harry said, for the ledger. And before either goblin could answer, he slid the plain ring of the House of Wilt onto the smallest finger of his right hand, where a child's hand had room for nothing larger, and the lamp did not flicker and the boom did not come, and the whole chamber went absolutely still. And then the ring grew warm, and then it grew cold, and then a voice that was not a voice spoke once inside the bones of his skull, asking him a single thing. In a language he had never learned and understood completely, and Harry Potter closed his eyes in the chamber of ledgers 300 feet beneath the city and answered it. Far below in the long gallery, behind a door that had not opened in 400 years, an oath that had waited that long to be answered heard the answer, and the iron remembered the shape of a hand, and the runes along the seam brightened one by one from the lintel down, and the door of the House of Wilt unsealed and swung inward on a darkness that had been keeping something safe for a very long time, waiting for someone with the right blood and the right answer to come and carry it back into the light. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. First voice the House of Wilt asked Harry whether he would rather be right or be obeyed. That was the whole of it. No riddle, no maze, no test of courage with a beast at the end. A voice that was not a voice, speaking in a language he had never learned and understood entirely, put the question into the bones of his skull and waited, and Harry understood at once that the answer most people would give was the wrong one, because most people asked that question would say right, because saying right made them feel good, and the House of Wilt had not waited 400 years in the dark to reward a child for feeling good. So he thought about it properly, which took less time than it should have, because he had been answering smaller versions of this question his whole life. I'd rather be right, he told the voice, but not so I can stop people, so I can stop the wrong thing. If being obeyed got the right thing done, I'd take being obeyed. I don't want the break because I like breaks. I want it because somebody's been driving with their eyes shut and calling it the good of the body, and a break doesn't bargain. It just stops the car. The cold left the plain ring on his smallest finger, and the warmth came back, and the warmth was different now. The difference between a stranger's hand and a hand you have shaken on a deal, and Harry knew, with the certainty of a sum coming out even, that the House of Wilt had decided he would do. He opened his eyes. The chamber of ledgers was exactly as it had been. The lamp had not flickered. Only Griffook had moved. He had come to the side of the chair, and he was looking at Harry's hand, at the plain ring that had stopped turning and settled, sized now to a child's finger as though it had always meant to be there. "It asked me something," Harry said. His voice came out rougher than he expected, the voice of a person who has been somewhere far away and has only just got back. "You said you couldn't hear it. I said I'd tell you for the ledger. It asked whether I'd rather be right or be obeyed." Vardek had risen from behind the desk, and you answered. "I answered the real question instead of the nice one." Harry looked at the ring. "I think that was the test, not which one you pick, whether you notice there's a trick in the asking." "Write that down," Vardek said to Griffook, and there was something in the 4 words that had not been there before, the particular quiet of a creature recalibrating a number it had thought it already knew. "The House of Wilt has not had a lord in 4 centuries, and the lord it has chosen is 8 years old and tells me, unprompted, that the test was in the question and not the answer. Write it down exactly. I want it in the roll in his own words when the doubters come, and the doubters are coming." There were 6 rings left, and Harry took them over what would have been, on the surface, the next 4 days, though down in the bank the days did not announce themselves, and he measured time instead by sleep and by the meals Griffook brought, which were the first meals in Harry's life that arrived without a chore attached to them, and which he ate slowly, the way you spend money you are not sure you are allowed to have. He did not take all 6 at once. Vardek forbade it, and Harry did not argue, because the first claiming had hollowed him out, left him shaking and starving and asleep before he could finish the bread, and a person who has felt a house read him to the bottom does not need telling twice that it costs something. So he took them one at a time, with sleep between, and each house asked its own question in its own way, and Harry kept his promise and told the goblins each one afterward for the roll. The House of Gamp showed him a law. It unrolled in his mind a statute he had never read, an old one, badly written, with a loophole in the 3rd clause wide enough to drive a crime through, and it asked him, in effect, what he would do with it. Most claimants, Vardek said later, tried to look clever, found the loophole, and proposed to use it. Harry found the loophole in about the time it took to read the clause, and then said he would close it, and when the house asked him why, since the loophole favored him, he said because a law with a hole in it isn't a law, it's a trap with good manners, and a house that's supposed to keep everyone honest shouldn't own the best trap in the room. The House of Gamp, which had been built to keep the others honest and then stolen by a man who married a lie, let him in. The House of Ashstone did not ask a question at all. It showed him a wall, a great old curtain wall of grey border stone, and a crack running up it, and a cold coming through the crack, and it simply waited to see what he would do, and Harry, who had spent his life being handed broken things to mend without thanks, looked at the crack and wanted to fix it before he had decided anything, and the House of Ashstone, which was a house of menders, opened to him on the strength of the wanting alone. That one cost him the least. He understood it best. The House of Folly, the healers and the warders, put a hurt thing into his hands. He never told the goblins what kind. He found the words would not go around it. It was small, and it was dying, and the house let him understand that it had done harm in its life, real harm, the sort that would do more if it lived. And the house asked him, without asking aloud, whether he would mend it. Harry held the dying weight of it and thought about the men who had bled his 7 houses, the forger and the liar and the saint, and how simple it would be to decide that some things had earned their dying. Then he mended it anyway, slowly, the way Hespa dusted a thing that would only gather dust again, and when the house asked why, since the thing would only hurt again, he said, because I'm not a court, I'm a healer's house, and a healer who mends only the deserving is just a judge with bandages, and I don't trust myself to decide who's earned dying. Not at 8, not the same week I learned the names of the men who run the world. The House of Folly, which Lucius Malfoy had bled for a decade through a single forged page, opened to him without another word. He did not write down what the House of Caradoc asked him. He told Vardek only that he had answered it, and that it had been about walking toward the thing when every nerve in you says run, and that he would prefer not to discuss it. And Vardek, who did not deal in kindness, looked at the grey iron ring now sized to the child's hand and did not press, which was, Harry thought, the most goblin form of mercy available, the kind that comes disguised as honoring a clause in a contract. The House of Sayre asked him to choose, from among the 7, which one he would give up if he could keep only 6. He refused, not defiantly. He simply told the house that the question was rigged, because the whole point of what his ancestors had done was that the 7 were stronger together than apart, and if he started trading them away one by one the moment it was convenient, he would be doing to his own inheritance exactly what the Convocation had done to the dead, treating votes as chips. The House of Sayre, which had been pooled and bartered and cast for 2 centuries by men who treated it as a chip, let him in so fast it almost felt like gratitude. And then there was Peveril. Peveril did not ask a question or show a wall or unroll a law. Peveril took him somewhere. Harry put on the iron ring the color of a storm. No, that had been Caradoc. The Peveril ring was the pale gold one, the oldest, plainer than plain, worn smooth by 1,000 years of hands. and the chamber of ledgers went out like a candle, and he was standing on a road. It was a long road across an empty country under a sky with no sun in it, and the road ran to a horizon where three figures stood waiting, very far off, and Harry understood without being told that he was meant to walk to them, and that they were the first of his line, the three brothers from whom everything else had come, and that they had been standing on this road inside this ring for a very long time, waiting to see who would finally walk it. He walked. It took a while. The road did not hurry for him, and he did not hurry for it. When he reached the three figures, they were not what the stories he had never heard would have made them. They were just three tired men, and the eldest looked at Harry the way a man looks at a debt collector, and the middle one looked at him the way a man looks at someone come to gloat, and the youngest, the smallest, looked at him with nothing on his face at all, which Harry trusted most, because a face with nothing on it is a face that has stopped performing. "You're the one," said the eldest, "after all this time." "A child, you hid yourselves in a child on purpose," Harry said. "Don't act surprised it worked." The middle brother laughed, a sound with no floor under it. "And what will you do with us, with everything we built and buried and bled for? They all say the same thing when they get here, the few who get here. They say they'll use it well. They say they'll be different. Tell us how you'll be different, little lord, and we'll decide whether the story is worth 400 years. Harry looked at the three of them, and he did the thing he did, which was to decline the question he was being asked and answer the one underneath it. "I'm not going to tell you I'll be different," he said. "Everybody tells you that and you're sick of it. I can see it on you, and I don't know if I'll be different. I'm 8, I don't know what I'll be." He pushed his taped glasses up his nose. "But I know what you're actually asking, which isn't will I be good. You're asking whether I understand what it's for. So here's what I think it's for. You didn't braid 7 houses into one and hide them in a baby because you wanted one person to be powerful. If you wanted that, you'd have made it loud, not secret. You made it secret because you wanted it to survive being hunted, and you wanted it to survive because you thought someday somebody's going to need a hand on the break that nobody saw coming. That's me. I'm the hand you couldn't see coming. I don't have to be good. I just have to be there when the people who think they've already won find out the dead house they've been voting woke up. That's the whole job. Be there, be real, don't sell it." The empty country was very quiet. The youngest brother, the small one, the one whose face had been doing nothing, spoke for the first time, and his voice was the quietest of the three. "He understands it," the youngest said. "He understands it better than we did." He looked at his brothers. "We hid it to be safe. He knows it was never about being safe." Then to Harry, with the ghost of something that was almost approval, "Go on then, you'll find out soon enough what it costs to be the hand nobody saw. We never did manage to make it cost nothing. Welcome to the road, little lord. It doesn't end where you think." The road went out. The chamber of ledgers came back. Harry was on his knees on the basalt floor, which he did not remember leaving the chair for, and the pale gold ring was on the third finger of his right hand, sized to a child, warm, and his face was wet, and he had not given the wetness permission, and for one moment, kneeling on the cold stone 300 feet under the city with 7 houses awake in his blood, and the whole weight of his short, unwitnessed life sitting on his chest like a stone he had carried so long he'd forgotten it was there. Harry Potter let himself feel it, the loneliness, the actual size of it, the one named thing he had refused to look at for 8 years because looking at it changed nothing and cost salt. Then he wiped his face on Dudley's old sleeve and stood up, because the next thing was the next thing, and the next thing did not care how he felt. Griffook handed him a cup of something warm without comment. Vardek at the desk was looking at the 7 rings now arrayed on the hands of a child who had to be helped to his feet, and the old goblin said, in the flat voice he used for the things that mattered most, "It is done. 7 houses, 7 lords, 1 heir, the first in 400 years to walk every road and answer every door. By the law of the bank and the law of the blood you are now lord of the houses of Peveril, Gamp, Folly, Ashton, Wilt, Sayre, and Caradoc, and the contract's full protection rises around you from this breath." He paused. "You are also a child who has not slept a proper night in a proper bed in his life, by the look of him. The law can wait a day. Even the dead waited 400 years. They will not begrudge you one." The Peveril house stood where no one would think to look for greatness, which was the whole point of it. A narrow grey house at the end of a lane in a village, so small it had fallen off the maps the wizards kept, and the maps the ordinary people kept both, hidden behind wards so old they had stopped looking like wards and started looking like weather, a permanent reluctance in the air that made the eye slide off and the foot turn back. Griffook brought him there by the Goblin Road, and put a key shaped like a question into a door that had not been opened since before Harry's grandparents were born, and stood back, because a goblin could carry an heir to his own threshold but could not cross it for him. Harry opened the door. The house was small and cold and full of dust and entirely his, and a creature was waiting in the hall. She was old for a house elf, her ears gone thin as paper at the edges, her eyes huge and dark and wet, and she wore a pillowcase that had been mended so many times it was more mending than cloth, and when she saw Harry she made a sound and put both hands over her mouth and sank down until her forehead touched the floorboards. "Hespa waited," she said into the floor, her voice shaking. "Hespa is bound to the house of Peveril, and Hespa waited." The last master told Hespa before he went, he said, Hespa, the line is hidden, the line will come back, you must keep the house, you must keep it ready, and Hespa kept it ready, for she stopped, and her thin shoulders shook, and she could not say the number. A long time, Hespa kept it a long time, and the young master is come, the young master is come home. Harry crouched down in front of her, which put them at the same height, and he looked at the dust on everything, and understood that she had cleaned it 1,000 times, and it had come back 1,000 times, because dust is patient, and one old elf is not enough for a whole house in 400 years, and that she had kept doing it anyway every day, for a line she had been promised would return, and had no proof ever would. You kept your word, Harry said. For 400 years, when nobody was checking, when nobody would ever have known if you stopped, you kept the house ready for someone who might never come. He thought of a column that never balanced, and of all the work that goes on to the left side of a page with nothing ever written on the right. I'm going to write that in the ledger, the real one, the bank's. So it's down somewhere true that Hespa of the House of Peveril kept faith longer than the men who run the world have managed to keep it for a single afternoon. He paused. Could I have something to eat? I don't actually know when I last ate that wasn't underground. Hespa lifted her head. Then she was a blur, weeping and beaming at once, and the cold house filled with the sound of a kitchen waking up after 400 years, and Harry sat at a long table that had been kept polished for a master who had finally come, and ate until he could not, and slept that night for the first time in a bed that was his, in a room that was his, in a house where the only other living thing had spent 4 centuries keeping faith. And if he dreamed of 3 tired men on an empty road, he did not remember it in the morning. In the morning the wards came. Griffook returned with the dawn, and 3 goblins Harry had not met, broad in the shoulder for their kind, who gave no names and needed none, because the long curved tools they carried said everything a name would have. They walked the boundary of the Peveril land in silence, and where they walked the old reluctant weather of the place thickened and woke, and Hespa watched them from the doorstep with her thin hands knotted in her apron, suspicious of anyone who touched her house, until Griffook said 3 words to her in the elf's own tongue, and she went still, and then nodded once fiercely and brought the warders water. The contract is in force, Griffook told Harry, and the contract says we keep you alive, and a promise a goblin has made is a promise a goblin will spend blood to keep. So, from today this ground is watched, not by guards you will see standing in corners. That is a wizard's notion of safety, and a wizard's notion of safety is mostly for show. This is older. The land itself will know a stranger's intent the moment he forms it within the boundary, and it will tell us, and we will reach you before he has finished deciding to be unkind. He looked up with his old penny eyes. Inside the boundary you are as safe as gold in the deep vaults. Outside it you are a child in a dead man's jumper who has just made enemies of the most dangerous men in the country. Do you understand the difference? Don't be stupid outside the fence, Harry said. That is the entire curriculum, yes. A pause, the nearest thing Griffook kept to approval. We cannot ward the whole world for you. We can only make the cost of reaching you high enough that the men who want you gone must do it in the open, where there are witnesses, and witnesses are a kind of armor too. Stay where we can reach you. Tell us before you go anywhere we have not warded. And do not under any circumstance accept an invitation that flatters you, because flattery is the cheapest door in the world and they will try it first. I count things, Harry said. Flattery never adds up, that's how you spot it. Griffook looked at him a moment, then went to help lay the last ward, and it went down thicker than the rest. Madame Griselda Marchbanks did not believe in him at first, which Harry counted in her favor. She was the oldest person he had ever seen who was not a goblin, so old that her face had given up on most expressions and kept only the useful ones, and she sat across from him in the front room of the grey house, having come at the bank's request and against. She made clear her own better judgment, and she looked at the 7 rings on the hands of a child in a dead man's jumper, and she said, "No." "No what?" Harry said. "No, I do not believe it, and no, I will not be made a fool of in my 98th decade by whatever this is. I have sat the Wizengamot since before your grandfather wet his first robe. 7 dormant lordships do not resurrect themselves in a single child, and they certainly do not do it in a child who has clearly been kept in a coal scuttle, and the fact that Gringotts vouches for it tells me only that the goblins have found a lever and I am looking at its handle." She folded her hands on the head of her stick. "So, convince me, or waste no more of what little time I have left, and do not perform for me. I have watched men perform in that chamber for 80 years, and I can smell it through a wall." So Harry did not perform. He told her plainly, sorted by kind, the same way he had given it back to Vardak. The 7 houses, the 7 privileges, the 7 thefts, who had taken what and how, the forged escheat and the married lie and the abeyance and the buried break and the pooled dead and the endless war. He did not raise his voice. He did not ask her to feel anything. He laid it out like accounts, and when she tried to trip him, she tried 4 times, with 4 false facts slipped in to see if he would agree to them out of eagerness. He caught all 4 and corrected her, and on the 4th he said, "You did that on purpose." That's 3 times you fed me something wrong to see if I'd swallow it because I want you on my side. I do want you on my side. I'm still not going to agree to things that aren't true to get you there. That's the whole reason any of this is worth doing." Marchbanks was quiet for a moment. Something moved behind the old, useful face. "4 times," she said. "What? 4 times, not 3. The first was when you came in. I called your mother a Pruett to see if you'd let a flattering lineage stand. You said nothing, which I marked as not knowing you knew." Her eyes had sharpened. "You let the first one go because correcting it bought you nothing and watching me bought you something. You are 8 years old and you slow-played me." For the first time the iron in her cracked, not into warmth exactly, but into attention, the full and undivided attention of a mind that had decided to take a thing seriously. "Merlin helped the lot of them," she said quietly. "It's real, the line's awake and it's awake in a bookkeeper." She rapped her stick once on the floor, a small verdict of her own. "Very well, Lord Peveril, since that is the name you'll have to learn to answer to. I will tell you how the board truly lies, and then I will tell you why everyone on it is going to want you managed, discredited, or dead. And then, if you still want to do this, I will show you how a child files a writ that 50 grown men will spend everything they have to tear up. Then sit and learn the chamber, because a child who files what you are about to file, and does not understand the arithmetic of the room he is filing into, is a child who has loaded a wand and pointed it at his own foot." She drew a circle in the dust of the table with one finger and quartered it. "The seats are many, but on any ordinary day perhaps 50 lords vote, because the rest are abroad or senile or cannot be troubled. Count those 50 in 3 parts. Here," she tapped 1/4, the block. 26 lords who vote together as surely as the tide, on tradition, on blood, on debt, and on what they cannot afford to lose, and who are gathered and counted and pointed by your charming friend in the corridor and 1 or 2 others like him. Here the marsh, a dozen lords with no fixed loyalty, who go where the weather goes, who can be argued, bought, leaned on, or shamed, and who decide every question the block cannot win outright. And here the rest, the old principled fools like myself, who vote our conscience and lose, because conscience has never once outnumbered the tide." Harry was already counting. 26 in the block, that's not a majority of 50, they need more. They need more, and here's where they get it, and here is the size of the thing you have walked into. The old voice did not hurry. "The block does not truly have 26 votes. It has 26 living votes and a sheaf of dead ones. The vacant ancient suffrages, the pooled seats your goblins call the convocation, cast as a block by a committee the block controls. On a close question they put forward 8, 10, a dozen votes that belong to extinct houses, and those phantom votes turn 6 and 20 into 8 and 30, and 8 and 30 out of 50 is the whole world. They have ruled that chamber for 200 years on the strength of corpses." Her eyes fixed on him. "And you have filed to wake 7 of the corpses, worse than wake them. 2 of your 7 were being voted as vacancies inside that very block, Sayre and the great one Peveril. The day your writs are accepted, the block does not merely fail to gain your 7 votes, it loses the phantom votes it cast in their place. The arithmetic does not move by 7, it moves by 14 all at once in a single afternoon, and it moves the wrong way for them." "And Peveril breaks ties," Harry said slowly, the sum assembling itself. "So even when it's close, even when the marsh splits down the middle and it comes to 1 vote, that 1 vote is mine, first to speak, last to decide. Now you have it." Marchbanks sat back against her stick. "That is why not one soul in that room will be able to leave you alone. The honest ones will want to guide the weapon they cannot undiscover. The greedy ones will want to buy it. And the ones who have borrowed and married and built their whole lives against a majority you have just deleted will not be thinking of guiding you or buying you at all. They will be thinking of the single arrangement that makes 7 inconvenient seats convenient again, which is the same arrangement men have always reached for when a vote they cannot win is held by a person they cannot move." She let the cold room hold that. "I am very old, and I have buried better men than the ones you are about to fright. I will help you. I will not lie to you about what the help may cost, because the goblins say you do not forgive being lied to, and at my age I have no years to spend earning back trust I needn't have spent." "I still want to do it," Harry said. "You haven't heard the dying part yet. I heard it from the goblins, twice. I'd rather do it and be in danger than not do it and be safe in a cupboard for the rest of my life knowing I could have." He looked at her steadily. Safe was never on offer. "My aunt taught me that, she just didn't mean to." The old woman looked at him a long moment. Then she reached into her bag and brought out a roll of heavy parchment and a self-inking quill and set them on the dusty table between them. "Then let us teach the dead to vote again," she said, "and see who screams." A writ of resumption, Marchbanks explained, was the oldest and simplest weapon in the chamber, and the one the establishment feared precisely because it was simple. It did not argue. It did not plead. It stated in the dry language of the law that a house ruled extinct was not extinct, that its heir lived and had claimed, and that its seat, its vote, and all the rights and revenues attached to it were resumed by their lawful holder as of the date of filing. Once filed and accepted by the registry, the burden flipped. It was no longer Harry's job to prove the houses lived. It became everyone else's job to prove they were dead in open chamber against a goblin blood record and 7 rings that had each accepted him. and there was no one alive who could do it because the houses were not dead, and a lie that has been told for 200 years is still a lie the first time someone with standing makes it face the daylight. They filed 7, not at once and not all alike. Marchbanks, who knew the chamber's plumbing better than the clerks did, advised him on the order, and Harry understood her reasoning and improved it twice, and they filed them as a sponsor in her ward, Madame Griselda Marchbanks of the Wizengamot, bringing forward the claims of the minor heir of the houses of Peveril, Gamp, Folly, Ashton, Wilt, Sayre, and Caradoc, with Gringotts as fiduciary witness and the blood record sealed in the bank's own iron, to be opened only before the full body. The writs went to the Wizengamot registry, which lived in a low stone room in the deep levels of the ministry, behind a counter polished by 100 years of clerks' elbows, and they were received by the chief of those clerks, a careful, neat, narrow man named Odo Prickluil, who wore his quills in a row on his breast pocket like a soldier's medals, and who had spent 30 years making certain that nothing surprising ever reached the chamber unfiltered. He took the 7 writs. He read the first. His neat face did not change, which was itself a discipline, the discipline of a man who has trained himself never to react where he might be seen. He read the second and the third, and when he reached the fourth, the writ of the house of Wilt, the buried house, the break he personally had welded shut and painted the color of the wall, a single muscle moved at the corner of his jaw, the only confession he allowed himself. "These will be processed in the ordinary course," Prickluil said in a voice as flat and gray as the stone. "Registry review can take some months, you understand there are formalities. There's a clock on a resumption writ," Harry said. He had read the law the night before, all of it, because reading the actual rules was the one advantage no one ever expected a child to take. 14 days to accept or reject, and a rejection has to say why in writing, citing the clause. "It's in the statute you keep behind you, third shelf, the red one. If you sit on it past 14 days, it's deemed accepted and you've lost the chance to object at all. So either you accept them or you reject them in writing and tell me which clause, and then I get to argue the clause." He looked up at the neat gray man with the row of quills. "I'm not in a hurry. I just want it on the record that the clock started today in front of a witness, so that whatever you decide to do, you decided it and it's got your name on it, and nobody can pretend later it just happened." Prickluil looked at the child across his 100-year counter for a long moment. "It will be on the record," he said, "that the clock started today." And he wrote the date slowly in his cramped gray hand and stamped each of the 7 writs with a stamp that came down like something falling, and Harry watched the clerk's face as he stamped the Wilt writ and saw, under the discipline, the exact look of a person who has just been handed a letter he has been dreading for 30 years and made to sign for it. Word went up the chain that afternoon. It always did. Lucius Malfoy was waiting for him in the marble corridor outside the registry, which meant he had known, which meant the chain was even shorter and faster than Marchbanks had warned. Harry knew him before anyone said a name. The corridor was full of ministry people moving with the particular hurry of people who are not as important as they are pretending to be, and Malfoy was the one not hurrying, the one standing perfectly still in the middle of the moving river in robes that cost more than the Dursleys' car, leaning on a cane with a silver serpent's head, and the river bent around him without seeming to notice it was bending. He had pale hair and a pale, pleasant, symmetrical face, and he smiled when he saw Harry, and the smile was the most expensive thing in the corridor. "Lord Peveril," he said before Marchbanks could put herself between them, tasting the title, finding it amusing. "Or do you prefer the other 6, such an embarrassment of names for so small a person? I am Lucius Malfoy. I had to come and see for myself. One hears the most extraordinary things, and one so rarely finds them to be true." He inclined his head, a courtesy with a hook in it. "Griselda, still alive, how tenacious of you." "Lucius," said Marchbanks, "still rich, how surprising, given how much of it isn't yours." The smile did not move, but something behind it took the note. "Madame Marchbanks misunderstands me," Malfoy said to Harry, as though the two of them were the only adults present and the old woman a piece of difficult furniture. "I have not come to threaten a child, what a thing that would be. I have come to offer help, which is what reasonable men do when they find a boy of obvious gifts in a position of obvious danger. Because you are in danger, my lord, you may not feel it yet. You are very young, and the young feel immortal, and the people around you," a glance at Marchbanks, "light as a feather, sharp as a pin, have their own reasons for letting you walk in front of the spears. But a child who claims 7 ancient seats overturns a great many careful arrangements, and the men whose arrangements those are will not all be as charmed by your precocity as I am. Some of them are not gentle. I can protect you from them. I have the influence, and I have, as it happens, a certain natural sympathy, having myself long held one of your little houses in trust and kept its affairs in admirable order. We could regularize that, quietly, to our mutual advantage. I could be a friend to you in a room full of people who are not." It was, Harry thought, very good. It was friendship and money and a warning all folded into one soft package, exactly the order Vardek had named, delivered so smoothly that a lonelier or hungrier child would have taken it without ever feeling the hook go in. He stood in the marble corridor in a dead man's jumper and looked up at the most expensive smile in the ministry and did arithmetic. "You said 3 things," Harry said. "I want to make sure I heard them right. You said you've got a natural sympathy because you hold one of my houses in trust and you've kept it in admirable order. That's folly. You collect the Mediwizard levy off it. You said we could regularize it quietly to our mutual advantage, which means you'd give me a cut to stop me asking for it all back, and you said you could protect me from people who aren't gentle." He pushed his glasses up his nose. "Here's my problem with the third one. You're offering to protect me from danger that nobody's mentioned to me except you and the goblins told me about it for free and then signed a contract promising to do it. You want me to pay for it with folly. So either you know who the dangerous people are, which means you talk to them, which means you're not separate from the danger, you're the front desk for it, or you don't know and you're just selling me a fire you set yourself. I can't tell yet which one it is, but it's one of them." "It's not the thing you said it was." The corridor seemed quieter, though no one had stopped moving. Malfoy's smile held. It was an excellent smile. But Harry was watching the eyes because the eyes were where a man kept the books he didn't show you, and in Malfoy's pale eyes something had finished its own piece of arithmetic and arrived, for the first time, at an answer it did not like. "How old did they say you were?" Malfoy asked softly. 8, Harry said. "Why? Did you have a number you were hoping for?" Lucius Marchbanks said, "The child has filed. The clock is running. Whatever you came to buy is no longer for sale, and you of all people know that a thing that is no longer for sale is best left untouched by men who would prefer there were no witnesses." She set a hand on Harry's shoulder, light steering. "We are leaving now. You may go back to whatever you tell yourself you are." Malfoy stood aside because there was nothing yet to be gained by not standing aside, and the smile stayed on his face the entire time they walked away, and Harry, who looked back once because looking back was data, saw the exact moment Malfoy decided that the soft package had failed and the next package would not be soft. In the lift down behind its folding brass grill, Marchbanks watched him. "Well, he's the front desk," Harry said. "Not the danger itself, the danger talks to him, you saw it. He asked how old I was twice. People ask that when the answer's breaking something they built their plan around. He planned on me being a child he could buy with a sweet and a scary story. I wasn't, so now he has to go and tell whoever he answers to that the cheap door didn't open. And then he tries a more expensive door. Money, properly this time, a real number, through someone respectable so it doesn't look like him, and if that doesn't work, say the rest. You said it already. So did the goblins twice each. I'm not going to keep saying the word out loud." He watched the floor slide up past the grill, saying, "It doesn't change the sum, it just makes my hands shake and I need them steady to read the next thing." The old woman was quiet a moment. "You are a very strange child, Lord Peveril." "I'm a very ordinary child," Harry said. "I just had a lot of practice at the part where no one is coming to help. The 7 houses are the only new bit. On my own part I've done since I was 4. Marchbanks did not answer that because the only answers to it were lies, and she had promised not to tell him those. Malfoy did not follow. He turned the other way, down a corridor that led to the older, quieter offices, and walked with no hurry at all, and stopped at a window of frosted glass with no name on the door, and knocked twice, and was admitted, and the door closed behind him with the final sound of a thing being decided in a room without witnesses. Inside, he set down his cane and arranged his face into the expression he used for men he intended to use, and said to the figure waiting in the gray light, "We have a complication, small, bespectacled, distressingly literal. I find I would like it to become an accident before it becomes a precedent." He drew off one glove, finger by finger, quietly, cleanly, and soon. The child counts everything. See that he is not given time to finish the sum. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. The abeyance Albus Dumbledore came on the 4th day, which Marchbanks said was 3 days later than she had expected and therefore worth noting, because a man who waits is a man who has been thinking, and a man who has been thinking is more dangerous than a man who acts. He did not come by the Goblin Road, which no wizard could travel, and he did not come to the Ministry, where there would have been eyes. He came to the lane, to the very edge of the Peveril wards, on foot, in robes the color of a deep evening, and he stopped at the boundary where the old reluctant weather thickened, and he did not try to cross it. He stood there in the lane like a guest who knows the difference between a closed door and a locked one, and he sent his request inward the courteous way, by a silver thing shaped like a bird that slipped through the wards where a man could not, and waited, patient and bright, on the windowsill until Harry came to look at it. "He's asking to come in," Harry said. Hespa had gone rigid in the kitchen doorway, her huge eyes fixed on the silver bird with an expression Harry had not seen on her before, the look of an old servant who has met the great and powerful and not enjoyed it. "He is asking," Griffook said from the shadow by the hearth where one of the warders now always stood, "because he cannot do otherwise. The wards will not part for him. Not for the chief warlock, not for Merlin returned. The house of Peveril knows its lord, and you are its lord, and no one crosses that line who you do not call across it." His old penny eyes were steady. "You may refuse him. You should know that refusing him is itself a message, and he reads messages the way you read sums." Harry thought about it. He thought about a sealed will and a phoenix in wax and the word safe used like a curse. Then he thought about something Vardek had said in the Chamber of Ledgers, that a thief who wants your money will eventually be satisfied, and a man who has decided he is your better never will, and he decided that the only way to learn which kind of trouble Albus Dumbledore was to let him in and watch him at close range. "I'll see him," Harry said. "In the front room, you stay, both of you. I want him to see that I'm not alone, and I want witnesses to whatever he says, because people who are used to being believed get careless about being heard." Up close, the most famous wizard in the world looked like somebody's grandfather, which Harry understood at once was the most dangerous thing about him. He was very tall and very old, and he folded himself into the chair by the cold hearth without any of the stiffness of the genuinely old, and his beard was white, and his half-moon spectacles were perched low, and his eyes over them were a blue so mild it was almost an apology. He looked at the 7 rings on the hands of a child in a dead man's jumper, and he did not perform surprise, and he did not perform pity, and when he spoke his voice was warm and unhurried and seemed to include Harry in some long, gentle joke that the rest of the world was too busy to get. "Thank you for seeing me, Harry," he said. "I hope you will forgive the bird. I find that knocking on a ward of that age is rather like shouting in a cathedral. One feels it is better to whisper." He smiled, and the smile reached his eyes, which was the trouble with it. "May I call you Harry? We have in a sense met before, though you would not remember it. I am Albus Dumbledore. Among a great many other titles that have accumulated on me the way moss accumulates on a stone, I am the chief warlock of the Wizengamot, which is the body whose seats you have lately surprised." "You're the one holding Peveril," Harry said, in abeyance, the first voice. "You've been voting it." Something moved very briefly behind the mild blue eyes, the flick of a man revising upward his estimate of how much the child across from him already knew, and then it was gone, folded back into the warmth. "I have," Dumbledore said, "and I have come in part to give it back. I want to be clear about that at the outset, because I suspect a great many people have already told you a great many alarming things about me, and some of them will even have been true." He laced his long fingers together. "The Peveril seat fell vacant a very long time ago. The duty of holding a vacant ancient seat in trust falls, by law, to my office. I did not seek it. I have cast its vote over the years, perhaps a dozen times, always on questions where I believed the right outcome hung by a thread, and always, I will tell you honestly, with the uncomfortable knowledge that I was speaking with a voice that was not mine. If the seat has a living lord, the seat is his. There is no argument. I will surrender the abeyance the moment the registry confirms your claim, and I will do it gladly, because a borrowed voice is a weight, Harry, and I am old, and I have carried a great many weights, and I should not mind setting one of them down." It was almost perfect. It gave away the thing Harry had come prepared to fight for before he could fight for it, leaving him with his weight on a foot that had nothing to push against. He recognized the move. Aunt Petunia did a smaller version of it, conceding the unimportant thing loudly so that you forgot to notice her keeping the important one. "That's the seat," Harry said. "What about the rest of it? You didn't walk to the edge of my wards to give me a vote you already said was mine by law. You'd have owled that. You came in person. So there's a thing you want that you can only get by looking at me while you ask for it. What is it?" Dumbledore was quiet for a moment, and then he laughed softly, a real laugh, the kind a person cannot quite suppress. "They told me you were direct," he said. "Very well, I will be direct in return, which I confess I do less often than I should, and which you have rather earned." He leaned forward, and the warmth did not leave him, but underneath it now Harry could feel the other thing, the thing that had made the most powerful men in the country go quiet around this gentle old grandfather for 50 years, the way you can feel the cold coming off a deep lake before you touch the water. "You are 8 years old, Harry. You have in a single week claimed 7 of the most powerful seats in our world, and in doing so you have made enemies of men who do not survive being made enemies of by gentle means. The goblins have told you this. They are right, but the goblins are a bank, and a bank protects an asset, and an asset is not a child. I am not a bank. I have spent my life standing between the children of our world and the men who would use them, and I am very good at it, and I am offering to stand between you and what is coming. Not to take your seats, to hold them as your steward openly by your lave, voting as you instruct until you are grown enough to vote them yourself in safety. Let the world see that the seats are claimed but guided. Let your enemies understand that to reach the child they must first come through me. It is the one arrangement that makes you too expensive to murder. I am offering you the only roof in the kingdom that the storm cannot lift, and I am offering it for nothing but your trust." The cold room held the offer. Harry looked at the old man for a long time, and the old man let him look, which was itself a kind of power, the patience of someone who has never in 50 years needed to fill a silence first. "You buried my parents' will," Harry said. He had not planned to say it. He had planned to be careful with it, to keep it, to spend it later in a room with witnesses that mattered. But the offer was so good and so warm and so nearly impossible to refuse that he understood, all at once, the only way to find out what was true about Albus Dumbledore was to put the one fact on the table that the warmth could not absorb, and watch what the steel did with it. The warmth did not flinch. That was the first thing Harry noticed, and it told him a great deal. A guilty man flinches. Dumbledore did not flinch because Dumbledore did not feel guilty, because Dumbledore had decided long ago and completely that he had been right. I sealed it, Dumbledore said. I did not bury it. The distinction matters, though I do not expect it to comfort you. Your parents named a guardian who was, within days of their deaths, imprisoned for their betrayal. Harry filed the new fact without moving. They named a second who was, within a year, tortured into madness by the very men I am now warning you about. The list your parents wrote in love became, almost overnight, a list of the dead, the mad, and the imprisoned, and at the bottom of it, where the law would send you if every name above failed, stood your mother's sister, the last of your blood, behind a protection I built from your mother's sacrifice that no enemy on earth could break. I did not consult a court because a court is a room full of mouths, and there were ears in every room in those years, and the single thing keeping you alive was that no one knew where the secret had put you. The blue eyes did not waver. I made a choice, Harry. I made it alone, and I made it knowing it would cost you a childhood, and I would make it again, because a hard childhood is a thing a person can survive and recover from, and even sometimes be tempered by, and being found by the wrong people at the age of one is not. You may hate me for it, many would, but do not mistake what it was. It was not theft, it was triage. And there it was, the steel, shown once plainly without apology, not a man caught. Man who had weighed Harry's whole childhood on a scale and decided calmly that it was the lighter thing. For my protection, Harry said. For your protection, yes. The phrase has been used to cover a great many sins, and I will not pretend it has never covered mine. But it has also sometimes been simply true. He spread his hands. I am offering it again now, with your eyes open this time, which is more than I could give you at 1 year old. Steward your seats. Let me carry the danger while you grow. You have every reason in the world not to trust me, and I am asking you to anyway, because the alternative is that you carry it alone, and you are 8, and no one should carry this alone. Harry was quiet, and then he asked the question that had been forming under all the warmth, the one he suspected was the true floor of the whole conversation. Why me? He said. Not the seats, me. You said I'm the most important child in the world, and you said it like you meant it, not like a compliment. Malfoy wants my votes. Selwyn wants his theft to stay buried. They want things I have, but you keep looking at me like I'm a thing all by myself, before the seats, before any of it. Why? For the first time the old man did not answer at once. The mild blue eyes went briefly to some far place behind Harry's shoulder, to a room or a year that Harry could not see, and when they came back there was something in them that had been in neither the warmth nor the steel, something older and more careful than either. There are reasons, Dumbledore said slowly, that you matter to our world beyond your 7 seats. Reasons that have nothing to do with votes, and that I will not lay on the shoulders of an 8-year-old in a cold room on the first afternoon we have properly met, because some weights, set down too early, break the back they were meant to be carried on. There will come a day when you and I must speak of them. It is not today. I ask you to believe only this, that long before you woke 7 dead houses, you were already someone certain men needed to control, and certain others needed gone, and the single difference between me and those men is that I have never once wanted either. I have wanted you to live long enough to choose for yourself what you will be. He spread his hands, and the ghost of the gentle joke returned. I am aware that this sounds precisely like what a man who wished to control you would say. I have no answer to that. It is the oldest difficulty of being trusted. The honest and the false reach for the same words, and only time tells them apart, and time is the one gift your enemies are most determined you should not give me. It was, Harry thought, the most honest thing anyone had said to him all week, and possibly the most skillful lie, and the worst of it was that it could be both at once. Harry sat with his feet not reaching the floor and did the arithmetic slowly, all the way to the bottom. No, he said, the fire that wasn't lit did not crackle. Hespa by the door made a tiny sound. You make a good case, Harry went on before Dumbledore could speak. Better than Malfoy's. His was friendship and money and a threat. Yours is just the threat, except you've made the threat true and then offered to be the wall against it, and you've made the wall sound like the only roof in a storm. And maybe it is. Maybe you're exactly what you say. But here's the thing I keep coming back to. He pushed his glasses up his nose. Every single person who's tried to manage me this week started by telling me how much danger I'm in and then offered to handle it for me, and the price was always the same price. The seats, the voice, the thing that's actually mine. You're the third one. You're the kindest one and the one who probably means it most, and you still ended in exactly the same place. Give me the power, little boy. The world's too dangerous for you to hold it. And the trouble is, the world got dangerous the second I picked up the rings. Before that, I was perfectly safe in a cupboard. So the danger isn't a reason to give the seats away. The danger is what the seats cost, and I already paid it. You are 8, Dumbledore said gently. You keep saying that. Everyone keeps saying that, like it's a fact that settles things. Harry looked at him steadily. I was 8 when nobody held the hearing. I was 7 when nobody read the will. Being 8 didn't protect me from any of you. It just meant nobody had to explain themselves. I'm done with being 8 as a reason. If you want my voice, you can have it the same way Marchbanks can, by telling me what you think and letting me decide like I'm a person. But you can't hold it for me for my own good. The last person who decided things for my own good signed a warrant and walked away, and he was the kindest man in the world too. You told me so yourself." The silence after that was very long, and it was Dumbledore who ended it, which Harry noticed, because it meant the old man had reached the end of the version of the conversation he had prepared. "You will appoint a regent," Dumbledore said at last quietly. "You must. A minor cannot vote his own seats. The law is plain. Someone will hold your voice until you are of age, whatever you decide today. I had hoped it would be me, because I can protect it. It will be someone. I would ask you to choose that someone very, very carefully, Harry, because the day you announce who holds the voice of 14 votes is the day every man in that chamber learns exactly whose throat to cut to control them." He rose, unfolding to his great height. "I will surrender the abeyance. I gave you my word and I keep it. But I will also still be watching, because watching over the children of our world is the one habit I have never managed to break, and you, whether you wish it or not, have just become the most important child in it." At the door he paused and looked back, and the warmth was entirely sincere and entirely undimmed by everything that had passed, which was, Harry thought, the most frightening thing he had shown all afternoon. "I hope very much that we end as allies. I think we may not. I think too well of you to lie to you about that. Good day, Lord Peveril." The silver bird took him out through the wards a man could not cross, and the lane was empty, and Hespa shut the door and leaned her thin back against it and let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for the entire visit. "That one," she whispered, "is the most dangerous of all of them, young master. The bad ones you can hate, that one you will want to please. Hespa has seen great wizards. Hespa has never seen one who could make you give him a thing by being sad that you might not." "I know," Harry said. He was looking at the chair the old man had left, at the dent his weight had pressed into 400 years of dust. "That's why I said no the first time. I won't get a second one that easy." That night Harry wrote 2 words on a scrap of Hespa's mending paper and looked at them for a long time. Regent Marchbanks. Dumbledore had been right about one thing, which was the most dangerous kind of right. A minor could not vote his own seats. Someone had to hold the voice until Harry was grown, and the day the name of that someone was known, every lord in the chamber would learn whose door to knock on in the dark. Marchbanks was 98 and had no heirs and no ambition left to buy, and a reputation 80 years deep that the prophet could not dent in a week. She was also, precisely because of all that, the simplest of any of them to reach, an old woman in an old house who had agreed to stand in front of the spears for a child she had known 8 days. He found her in the kitchen the next morning, where she had taken to drinking Hespa's tea and pretending not to enjoy it. "I want you to be my regent," Harry said. "Hold the voice until I'm of age. I've thought about it from every side I can find, and it keeps coming out the same. You don't want the seats, which means no one can offer you more for them than I can. You're too old to be threatened with a future you haven't got, and you already said the thing nobody else has said this whole week, which is that you won't lie to me about what it costs." He pushed the scrap across the table. "It paints a target on you. Dumbledore said so, and he's right. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't. If you say no, I'll understand it, and I'll find another way." Marchbanks looked at the 2 words for a while. Then she folded the scrap and put it in her sleeve, the way you keep a thing you intend to honor. "I have spent 80 years in that chamber watching it run by men who wanted it," she said. "It will be a novelty to hand my voice to a child who counts the cost and means to use it anyway. Yes, Lord Peveril, I will hold your voice. Try only not to get me killed before the hearing. I have a great many people I should like to outlive out of spite." The Daily Prophet attacked him on the 6th day, which meant the second package had arrived exactly when Marchbanks said it would, and it was not soft. It came in print, which was clever because print wore the face of fact. The article did not say Harry was lying. It was far too careful for that. It asked questions. It noted in the tone of a concerned friend that an extraordinary claim had been quietly lodged at the registry, that a single minor child purported to be heir to no fewer than 7 ancient and long-extinguished houses, a thing without precedent, resting entirely on a Gringotts blood record. And it asked with wide and innocent eyes whether it was wise, whether it was safe, whether it was even sane, for the wizarding world to surrender 7 seats of its own sacred governance on the unsupported word of goblins. A people who had, the article reminded its readers, risen in armed rebellion against wizardkind no fewer than 5 times, and who might be presumed to have their own reasons for wishing to place 14 votes in the hand of a child they alone could reach. "It is well made," Marchbanks said, reading it aloud at the long table while Hespa banged pans in the kitchen in what Harry was learning to recognize as elvish fury. "Observe how it never accuses, it only wonders. A man cannot sue a wonder. And observe the true blade in it, which is not aimed at you at all. It is aimed at the goblins. It tells 50 wary lords that to confirm your claim is to let the goblins win, and there is no lever in our world older or easier to pull than that one. Half the chamber would burn their own houses down before they would be seen handing a victory to Gringotts." She set the paper down. "They have stopped trying to manage you. This is the discredit. They mean to make your claim so disreputable that confirming it costs more than denying it, and then they will deny it on procedure and call it prudence." The procedure came the next morning on cream-colored paper with a great many seals, and Marchbanks read it twice before she would let Harry see it, which told him it was bad. A motion to dismiss, she said, filed jointly, which is the interesting part. They have set aside their usual habit of letting one man take the risk, and signed it as a committee, which means the convocation has decided this is worth being seen to act together. They move that your writs be struck before any hearing on their merits on 3 grounds. She counted them on fingers gone to bone. 1. Standing. A child of 8 cannot lawfully bring an action, they say, and a sponsor cannot manufacture a standing the principal does not possess. 2. Form. The writs are defective, they argue, because they rest on a foreign record. The goblin blood roll, which our law, they now suddenly recall, requires be independently confirmed by a wizarding examiner before it may found a claim. And 3. The one with the knife in it. They ask that the whole matter be referred to a closed committee of senior lords for review, rather than heard in open chamber, in the interest, you understand, of not troubling the full body with a frivolous proceeding. A closed committee of senior lords, Harry repeated. Made of who? Made of them. That is the entire trick. They cannot beat you in the open, so they ask to move the fight into a small room they already own, and they dress the request as courtesy, as sparing everyone's time, as protecting the dignity of the chamber. If they win the procedure, you never get your hearing at all. You get a private committee of the very men who stole your seats, sitting in judgment on whether your seats were stolen, and announcing, after due and solemn consideration, that they were not. She laid the cream paper on top of the prophet, 2 layers of one campaign. This is how it is truly done, Lord Peveril, not with knives, with committees. The knife was the impatient one breaking ranks. This is the patient one's closing them again. There's a name on it, Harry said. He had been reading the small print, because the small print was where the theft usually was. An expert, a Master Augustus Fenwick, examiner of lineages, who says the goblin blood method is, what does it say, unverifiable by any wizarding authority and therefore inadmissible. They got a wizard with a title to say the test doesn't count, so now it's not goblins against wizards. It's a wizard expert against the goblins, and the lords get to side with the expert and feel responsible doing it. Precisely, you learn quickly. Who pays Master Fenwick? Marchbanks looked at him. That's the question, isn't it? Harry said. Always not what the expert says, who pays him. An expert is just a mouth somebody rented. Find out whose money is in his pocket and you'll find out which of them is running the discredit, and I'd bet a house it's the pale one with the snake on his cane, because forging a paper and renting a mouth are the same kind of crime, the kind you commit at a desk when you think nobody with standing will ever read it. He pushed the paper back across the table. We can't fight a wonder, you said so we don't. We do the thing they are trying hardest to stop instead. We make them read the actual law out loud in the room with everybody watching, and we use the break to do it. For a moment the old woman did not understand. Then she did, and something happened to her ancient face that had not happened in a long time. It went, very briefly, young. The law speaker's demand, she breathed. Wilt, you hold wilt. She laughed, a dry crack of a sound. They have spent a week shouting that your claim is unproven, and the entire time you have been holding the one privilege in the chamber that can compel them to prove their own. Oh, that is good, that is very good. Tell me you understand what you are reaching for, Lord Peveril, because if we pull this lever we cannot put it back. I understand it, Harry said. Pricklewill buried the resumption statute, the real one, the one with the 14-day clock and the part that says a house isn't extinct just because somebody wrote extinct next to it. He buried it so nobody could use it against the convocation, but Wilt can force any law to be read out in full from the true record and freeze the whole room while it happens. So we make him dig up the law he buried and read it to the chamber in his own voice. And once the real law is read out loud in front of everyone, their procedure to dismiss me dies, because the procedure they're using is the fake one and the real one says I win. He looked at her. They wanted a wonder. We give them a statute. You can argue with a wonder forever. You can't argue with a law while it's being read to your face. Vardak supplied the rest of the wall on the 7th day, and he supplied it the way the bank supplied everything, in writing, sealed, and impossible to dispute. The prophet's expert had said the goblin blood method was unverifiable by any wizarding authority. Vardak's answer was a single scroll, very old, bearing the seals of both Gringotts and the Wizengamot of 400 years past, in which the wizarding authority of that age had not only verified the goblin blood method, but had made it the legal standard for the proving of disputed lineage, by treaty, signed by a chief warlock whose portrait still hung in the chamber. The method the prophet's rented expert had called inadmissible was the method the wizards themselves had once begged the goblins to perform, because the goblins' books did not lie and the wizards did. He has accused the bank of using a test no wizard recognizes, Vardak said, rolling the scroll with hands that did not hurry. We will answer that the test he scorns was written into your own law by your own ancestors, who recognized it well enough when their own inheritances hung on it. Let Master Fenwick explain to the chamber why a method good enough for the chief warlock of the year your cathedral was new is not good enough for a child the present lords would prefer did not exist. Let him call 4 centuries of his own predecessors fools. I should enjoy reading his face. You don't have feelings about wizards, Harry said. I have an excellent memory of them, said Vardek, and the memory is about to be very useful. He sealed the scroll and set it with the others. You have a roof of goblin record, a break of ancient privilege, and a sponsor who has sat that chamber longer than your enemies have been alive. It is, for a child 7 days into the world, a remarkably complete wall. The lamp put 2 flames in his eyes. Walls are tested, my lord, yours is about to be. The men you have cornered have run out of soft packages. Beware, we have warded you, and do not go out, because the next thing they send will not come in print. It came 2 days later, and it did not come in print. It came on the one errand the wards could not cover, which was the thing Harry should have seen and did not, and afterward he made himself look at exactly how he had missed it, because a mistake you do not examine is a mistake you have agreed to make again. A package had to be lodged at the ministry registry. The original law speaker's demand, formally entered in person by sponsor and ward, because the law that governed the break required the privilege to be invoked in the body of the building and not by owl. Everyone had warned him. It was the one unavoidable exposure, the single seam in the wall, and the way to survive it was to be quick and surrounded and gone before the chain could move. The chain had been waiting for the seam. They always wait for the seam. It was not a curse out of the air, which the goblins could have felt coming. It was a thing already in the building, already lawful, already passed through every protection because it had been placed there by someone with the right to place things. A registry trolley, the ordinary kind, stacked with the ordinary boxes of the ordinary dead files, parked in the ordinary corridor down which sponsor and ward had to pass, and as they passed it the topmost box came open, and what was inside it was not paper. Harry's first warning was Griffook moving. The goblin had insisted on coming, against the rule that goblins did not walk the ministry's marble, and the ministry had allowed it because a fiduciary witness had the right, and Griffook had spent the entire short walk with his head slightly cocked, listening to the building the way Harry listened to a house, and when the box opened Griffook was already moving, already between Harry and the trolley, already shouting a word in the goblin tongue that needed no translation, and the thing that came out of the box. Low and fast in the gray of old files was on him before the word was finished. It was precise what happened next, and it was over in the time it takes to read this. The thing was a cursed blade given the shape of a serpent and the patience of a paid professional, charmed to seek the youngest blood in the corridor and to find any throat in its way an acceptable substitute. It found Griffook's arm first, because Griffook had put his arm where Harry's throat had been, and there was a sound, and there was goblin blood, dark and shocking on the white marble. And then the 2 warders who had been walking 10 paces back in the costume of ordinary clerks were no longer 10 paces back and no longer in costume, and there were 2 more sounds, shorter, final, and the serpent blade lay in 3 pieces on the floor and did not move again. It had taken perhaps 4 seconds. Harry had not moved at all, which he examined afterward and decided was correct. A child who throws himself sideways into an unknown corridor is a child who runs onto the second knife. He had stood absolutely still, which had kept the blade's attention exactly where Griffook needed it, and he understood, looking at the gray pieces and the dark blood and the goblin who had put his own arm between a child and a death, that being still had been the only useful thing in his power and he had done it, and that this was not nothing, and also that it had cost a creature who owed him nothing a great deal of blood. "You're hurt," Harry said. His voice came out level, which surprised the part of him that was standing off to one side watching, the part that never stopped watching. He was already pulling off the dead man's jumper to press against the wound, because pressing against a wound was a thing his hands knew how to do from the Folly Road and from 100 of Dudley's tantrums, and Griffook let him, which a goblin would not have done for anyone he did not count as his own. "The contract," Griffook said through his teeth, "says we spend blood to keep you alive. I am merely keeping the contract. Do not make it sentimental. Press harder." Around them the marble corridor had filled with the particular noise of important people discovering too late that something had happened on their watch, and somewhere among the noise Harry heard the one voice that had stayed perfectly calm, the smooth, unhurried voice of a man arriving at exactly the right moment to be seen being shocked, expressing his profound concern that such a thing could occur in the very heart of the ministry, to a child no less. And really one had to ask what kind of dangerous attention the child had drawn upon himself to provoke it. Harry did not look up at Lucius Malfoy. He kept the pressure on Griffook's arm, and he kept his face down, and he let one thing show on it that he wanted reported back, which was nothing at all, no tears and no flinch and no childish collapse, only a bespectacled child kneeling in goblin blood with his jaw level and his hands steady, refusing in front of 50 witnesses to come apart on cue. They moved him fully to the Peveril house that night, and he did not argue, and Hespa would not let go of his sleeve for an hour, and a goblin healer came by the Banks Road and did things to Griffook's arm that smelled of iron and char, and the arm would keep, the healer said, which was the bank's way of saying the cost had been paid and the account still balanced. would not sleep until he had done the post-mortem, which Hespa fought and lost, because a child who has just been hunted and refuses to examine the hunt is a child who has agreed to be hunted again, and Harry had decided years ago in a cupboard that he would not agree to anything twice. "Walk me through how it got in," he said to Griffook, who sat with his bandaged arm held against his chest and did not pretend the child should be resting. "The land tells you a stranger's intent inside the boundary. So the wards work, but the wards are around this house, and the knife was in the ministry, where you can't ward anything because it isn't mine. That's the seam. I knew it was the seam. Everyone said so why did it still nearly work? Because we guarded the corridor and not the furniture," Griffook said. "The trolley was lawful, the boxes were lawful. They had passed every protection the building has, because the building's protections ask whether a thing is allowed to be there, and a registry trolley is always allowed to be there. The blade was placed by someone with the right to place files in the registry, which narrows the someone to a very short list, and at the top of that list is a careful gray man with a row of quills who buries laws for a living." His eyes were steady. "We cannot ward what the law itself lets through. That is the lesson, and it is a hard one, and it is the same lesson your 7 houses learned the slow way. The most dangerous theft is always the one the rules permit." Harry turned it over. "Then we change what I am in the corridor," he said. "The blade was charmed to find the youngest blood in the room. So next time I'm not the youngest blood in the room, and I'm not on a schedule anyone can read in advance, and the filing that has to be done in person gets done at an hour nobody chose and in a way nobody expects. We can't close the seam. We can stop being predictable inside it." He looked at the bandaged arm. "And you don't put your arm in front of the next one. You've paid that already. I'll not have the contract balanced in your blood twice for the same line." "You do not give the orders on how a goblin keeps his oath," said Griffook, but there was no edge in it. Only the flat, dry warmth Harry had learned to read as the closest thing the bank kept to affection. And the attack, which had been meant to end him, did the opposite, because it had happened in front of 50 witnesses in the heart of the ministry, and there is no wonder in the world strong enough to make 50 people unsee a child kneeling in blood that was spilled to save him. Marchbanks came at first light with the prophet under her arm, and a look on her ancient face that Harry could not read until she laid the paper down, and then he understood. It was the look of a soldier who has watched the enemy make the one mistake you cannot recover from. The headline did not say a child had drawn dangerous attention. The pressman had been there, the pressman had seen, and a serpent-shaped blade that hunted the youngest blood in a ministry corridor was a story that wrote itself, and the public, who did not read registry filings or care about ancient suffrages, understood a knife perfectly well. Someone had tried to murder a little boy in the ministry. The wonder was dead. You cannot wonder whether a claim is real when someone has just tried to kill the claimant for making it. "They overreached," Marchbanks said, and she did not trouble to make it gentle. "They could not buy you, they could not shame you, and the one who could not bear to wait reached for the knife too soon, and now the whole country has seen the knife. The chamber cannot dismiss you quietly now. It would look exactly like what it is. They have to give you your hearing in the open where they wanted least to fight, because the only thing more dangerous to them than your claim is the appearance of murdering a child to suppress it." She set a second paper beside the first, an official one, stamped gray. "Prickluil sent this an hour ago. The law speaker's demand has been entered. The resumption statute will be read into the chamber, and the validity of your 7 writs will be heard before the full Wizengamot." She turned it so he could see the line at the bottom, where a date had been written in a cramped gray hand and struck through with the chamber's own seal, fixing it, making it real, a day now standing on the calendar that had not stood there before, the day a child would walk into the oldest and coldest room in the wizarding world, and make 50 cornered lords prove that the dead they had been voting were truly dead. Harry looked at the date. Then he looked at Griffook's bandaged arm, and at Hespa's thin hands, and at the 7 rings on his own, and he did the only thing the moment asked of him, which was to begin, quietly, to count the days. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The convocation, the proof, was hiding in plain arithmetic, which was the only place Harry ever really looked. He found it on the 3rd night before the hearing, in the strong room of the Peveril house, where Vardek had brought 2 things the bank did not lend to anyone: a copy of the chamber's voting record going back 2 centuries, and the master roll of the sealed accounts, the true one, the one that listed not only which houses had been ruled extinct, but the exact day each line had finally gone out. Harry laid them side by side on the long table under a lamp that burned without fuel, and he did what no one had thought to do in 200 years, because no one had ever held both books at once and also happened to be a child who could not stop counting. It was, he thought, a beautiful crime, in the way a lock is beautiful, and he meant the word as an engineer means it, and not as a thief does. The 2 books that proved it had never been dangerous on their own. The voting record lived in the chamber, where the lords could read it whenever they liked and never did, because who reads 200 years of their own minutes? The roll of the dead lived in the bank, where the goblins read it constantly and could do nothing with it, because the bank could not act without an heir. Each book was harmless. The crime lived in the space between them, in the one gap no one had standing and inclination both to close, and it had survived 2 centuries not because it was hidden but because it was split, kept in 2 honest houses forbidden by law and by custom from ever comparing notes. The cleverest part of the whole machine was that it needed no liar to maintain it. It needed only that the 2 people who could see it never be the same person. And then a child had walked a road of dragons and become, by blood and by contract, the one creature alive who could sit in a strong room with both books open and simply add. He matched the dates. Here, he said after some hours, and his voice was the flat, certain voice he used when a sum had finished coming out. House Crouchley, ruled extinct in the roll on the 4th of March because that's the day the last Crouchley died with no heir. The bank wrote it down the same week. But the voting record has House Crouchley's vote being cast in the chamber on the 11th of March, and the 2nd of June, and the 19th of September all the same year. After the last one was in the ground, he looked up. A dead house voted 4 times in the year it died, and it voted with the block every single time. Vardek leaned over the 2 books with the stillness of a creature reading its own most sacred error. It is 1 instance, he said, but he did not say it like a man who believed it was 1 instance. It's not 1, Harry said and turned the page. I found 9 before I stopped because I stopped to tell you. House Crouchley, House Merworth, House Vance the elder line, not the living one. Sayer mine voted as a vacancy 31 times in 2 centuries, and 11 of those were after the last Sayer who could have cast it was provably in your own roll dead. He pushed the books together so the 2 columns lined up, the date of death on the left and the date of the vote on the right, exactly as he had kept his own ledger his whole life, work on one side and payment on the other, and for once the 2 sides told a story instead of an absence. This is the convocation. This is the whole thing written down in 2 books that nobody ever put next to each other. They didn't just hold the empty seats, they voted them. They voted corpses on the block side on close questions for 200 years, and they wrote it all down, because it never once occurred to them that anyone would have the standing to ask the bank for the day the bodies went cold. The lamp burned. The strong room was very quiet, the particular quiet of a place 3 feet of stone deep where Hespa's wards and the goblins' wards overlapped and doubled. You understand what you're holding, Vardek said at last. I'm holding the reason they tried to kill me, Harry said, not the seats. As long as the seats were just dormant, they could argue I wasn't really the heir, or that the goblins forged the blood test, or that a child has no standing. They could fight it for years in committees, but this isn't about whether I'm real, this is them. Their names, their votes, they're dead in their own record. This doesn't need me to be the heir of anything. A clerk could read it. It proves the convocation manufactured the majority that's run your world for 200 years, and it proves it with sums a child did in one night. He squared the edges of the 2 books. That's why the knife came so fast. I thought it was because I was inconvenient. It's worse than that. I'm the only person who's ever had a reason to put these 2 books on the same table, and the moment I did, every close vote they ever won became a crime they can be hung for. How far back does it go? Griffith asked, and it was the first time Harry had heard the younger goblin ask a question and not want the answer. All the way down, Harry said. He turned the pages backward decade by decade, the way you walk a wall looking for where a crack begins, and the crack did not begin anywhere. It ran under the floor. The earliest pooled vote I can find is 206 years ago. House Merworth, 3 weeks in the ground, voting on a grain tax. After that it never stops. Every generation a few more houses die and get folded into the pool, and every generation the pool votes the same way, and the way it votes is always whichever way keeps the families who run the pool on top. It isn't a scandal. A scandal is a thing that happens once. This is a machine. Somebody built it on purpose a long time ago and then taught the next lot to keep it oiled, and the lot after that grew up thinking it was simply how the chamber had always worked, because by then it was older than anyone alive to question it. And the certifications, Vardek said, his voice had gone very level. Every vacant suffrage cast must be certified lawful by a standing committee, and the certification must be witnessed. Read me the witnesses. Harry read them. He read the names slowly because some he had heard and some he had not, and Vardek's face did the thing it did, which was nothing at all, which was how Harry had learned to tell when a goblin was holding still around something that hurt. 3 of the witnessing names were living lords of the present block, 2 were dead clerks of the registry. And 1, recurring down the centuries in the careful slot where the bank's own confirmation was required, was a seal Harry did not recognize until Vardek told him what it was, in a voice scraped down to the wood. That is the seal of the House of Records, my office, worn by my predecessors and once or twice, in years I could name, by me. When the committee certified that a vacant seat was theirs to vote, they brought the certification to the bank, and the bank confirmed that the seat was indeed sealed and the line indeed extinct, and the bank told the truth each time because the line was extinct. We had ruled it so, and our truthful confirmation was the last brick the lie needed to look like law. He set the book down with great care, as a man sets down a thing he would rather throw. We did not vote the dead. But we vouched the dead were dead, and they built a theft on the vouching, and we have been the most honest signature on 2 centuries of fraud, exactly as the chief warlock has been the most honest vote. This is why your blood waking these doors discharges our oldest debt and not merely a profit. We did not only fail to act, we were used. And a goblin who has been used and does nothing once he can is no longer a creature who keeps a ledger. He is one. Harry looked at the old goblin a moment and understood he had been shown a thing the bank did not show and said nothing that would make it smaller. Then it does not leave this room, said Vardek. It leaves this room once, Harry said. On the day of the hearing, in my hand, read out loud where they can't bury it. Everything we've got is only worth anything if it gets said in the open before they can decide it didn't happen. You taught me that. A debt nobody reads is a debt nobody pays. Lord Cassius Selwyn came to the wards 2 days before the hearing, and unlike Dumbledore he did try to cross them, and the old reluctant Weather threw him back into the lane on the seat of his expensive robes, and he stood up shouting, which was, Harry thought, watching from the window, a very efficient way of telling you everything about a man in the first 10 seconds. He was large and going soft, with a face that had been handsome 40 years and a stone ago, and a voice pitched to fill a chamber that had stopped listening to it some time back, and he stood in the lane and demanded, by all the rights of blood and precedence, to be admitted to speak with the impostor who dared lay claim to the ancient seat of Gamp. Harry had Griffock open the gate and let him stand just inside it on the gravel, where the wards would hold him gentle as long as he behaved and break him in half the instant he did not, and Harry came out to meet him in the cold afternoon in a dead man's jumper, because he had learned that the jumper unsettled men like Selwyn more than any robe could, by refusing to play the game they had dressed for. You, Selwyn said, looking down a long way, are a gutter snipe in a borrowed seat. The house of Gamp has been Selwyn for 6 generations. My great-great-grandmother carried it to us in lawful marriage, and I will not have it filched by a Surrey orphan in a bank of goblins and that withered traitor Marchbanks playing kingmaker in her dotage. Your great-great-grandmother, Harry said, was married to a Selwyn in a ceremony that produced no children and ended in her early death, and the seat passed to her widower as a grieving husband's inheritance. That's the story. I read it. It's a good story. He looked up at the large, soft man with the chamber-filling voice. Here's the problem with it. The last true daughter of Gamp did have a child. The blood record says so. It's how I'm holding the seat right now because that child's line ran down into me. So either your ancestor's wife had a child the marriage didn't produce, which means the marriage wasn't what you say it was, or the blood is lying and the blood doesn't lie. You can ask the goblins. So which is it, Lord Selwyn? Was it a real marriage with a hidden child you've been pretending didn't exist for 6 generations? Or was it never a marriage at all, just a way to put a Selwyn hand on a Gamp seat and call the theft a wedding? Selwyn tried, for a moment, to be a lord about it. He drew himself up and informed Harry that the House of Selwyn did not answer questions put by children, that there were ancient rights of blood feud which protected a noble house from slander, that he could and would call the full weight of tradition down upon any guttersnipe who impugned 6 generations of honorable stewardship. He said honorable stewardship twice, which was how Harry knew he had stopped believing it, because a man who believes a thing says it once. Blood feud, Harry said. That's a threat to fight me. I'm 8. You'd be the lord who declared war on a child over a seat you can't prove is yours. In the same month, somebody put a knife in a ministry corridor at the same child. Do it, please. Stand up in the chamber and declare blood feud on me. I'll bring the goblins and the record and the dates, and I'll let you finish before I open the book. You'll have made yourself the villain of your own ending and saved me the work. He kept his voice level. Or you can stop performing at me and answer the question, because the answer goes in the record either way, and you'd rather it went in with your version than without it. The color came up Selwyn's neck the way it used to come up Uncle Vernon's, and Harry watched it with the same detachment, because a man whose face does his arguing for him has already lost the part that happens in the head. How dare you, Selwyn said, but it came out smaller than he meant it, and he knew it, and that made it worse. Little you have no idea what you have set yourself against. Houses older than your scribbling have agreed that some seats are better held by men who understand their weight than left to rot. We kept Gamp alive, we voted it. We carried its dignity when there was no Gamp left to carry it, and now you would tear up 6 generations of stewardship on the word of a blood quill and a goblin's grudge. You voted it with the block, Harry said. Every time, so did the dead. I've got the book. He said it quietly, and he watched it land, watched the large man understand, a beat too late, that the child had let him fill the air with bluster precisely, so that he would say the word voted out loud on Peveril ground, where the wards remembered everything spoken inside them. You just told me you voted Gamp. You just admitted it. I didn't even have to ask. You're so used to nobody being able to touch you that you confessed to a stranger on his own gravel because you thought the gravel didn't matter. For a moment Selwyn could not speak at all. Then something in him changed direction, the way a cornered thing stops blustering and starts calculating, and what he said next he said low and fast, the words of a man trying to throw someone else off the back of the sled before the wolves reach him. It isn't me you want, Selwyn said. Whatever you think I did, I married into mine. There was paper. Bad paper, old paper, but paper, and a court could chew on it for 10 years. You want a real crime, you want a forgery, you go and look at how Lucius Malfoy came to hold your folly seat, because there was no marriage there and no court that takes 10 years. There was a dead family and an escheat that was written after the family was already cold by a hand that wanted the levy, and he has been collecting it ever since, and he will let me hang to keep it, so I will see him hang first. He drew himself up, shaking. I have said nothing, I deny all of it. But you put your blood quill on the folly escheat, boy, and you tell me whose hand wrote it, and then we will see who the thief is. He turned and stormed back down the lane, and Harry stood on the cold gravel and watched him go, and did not feel the thing he might have felt at having broken a bully, because the sum was not finished, and a win you stop to enjoy is a win you stop watching. He went inside instead to Griffook and said, "He gave us Malfoy and the folly escheat to save his own neck. Get me the escheat, the original. I want to know whose hand wrote it after the family was already dead, and I want it before the hearing." The folly escheat came up from the bank by the Goblin Road the next morning, the original, 2 centuries of dust on it and a forgery inside it, and Harry spread it on the strongroom table beside a second document Vardek laid down without being asked, the bank's own dated record of the death of the last folly. "Selwyn told you where to look to throw the wolves onto Malfoy and off himself," Vardek said, "which does not make him wrong. A man who betrays his ally to save his neck is still a witness to the crime. Look at the dates first, always the dates." Harry looked at the dates. The last folly, a daughter, a healer like all her line, had died on a winter night 200 years gone, and the bank had recorded it within the week, as the bank recorded everything. The escheat, the paper declaring the house dead and its property and its levy reverted to the crown for redistribution, was dated 11 days before she died. "It's dated before she was dead," Harry said. 11 days, you can't escheat a house that still has a living member, so either someone knew she'd die 11 days early or they wrote the paper first with the date they wanted and waited for a death that suited them. He did not say the rest, because the strong room did not need it said. "Do not build that wall higher than your stones," Vardek said, not unkindly. "We can prove the paper false. We cannot yet prove how the lady died, and a child who accuses a house of a murder he cannot prove hands his enemies the gift of calling him a liar about everything else. Prove the forgery. The forgery is enough to strip the seat, the levy, and the forgers standing all at once. Leave the grave alone until you hold a spade that will not break in it." "How do we prove the forgery to a room that wants to disbelieve us?" It was Griffook who answered, and he answered by bringing out a flat box, and from the box a thin gray wafer that he laid against the escheat's signature, and the wafer drank something from the ink the way the blood quill had drunk from Harry's finger. "Ink remembers," Griffook said. "Wizards forget this, because wizards write with quills that lie as easily as their mouths. Goblin assay does not ask what a document says. It asks how old the ink is, where the iron in it was mined, whether the hand was steady or hurried, whether the words were written at one sitting or added later in a different season." He watched the wafer change color, patch by patch, reading it the way Harry read a column. "The body of this escheat is 200 years old. The signature that grants the folly levy onward is 200 years old in the parchment and 19 years old in the ink. It was added a lifetime after the document was made. Someone took a genuine old escheat, a real one, for some other dead house, and added a clause in a grant 19 years ago, fresh ink on old skin. The fresh ink is the confession, because ink, unlike a wizard, cannot be talked into lying about its own age. 19 years ago, Harry said slowly. That's about when Malfoy started collecting the levy. That is exactly when. And the bank can date it to the season, and name the workshop the fresh ink was milled in, and that workshop kept a ledger of its sales, as honest tradesmen do, and the bank has read that ledger, and a quantity of that precise ink was bought 19 years ago by a steward of the house of Malfoy. He rolled the wafer's reading into a sealed strip and set it with the books. You asked whose hand wrote it after the family was dead. The hand we cannot yet swear to. The purse that bought the ink we can. In that room the purse will be enough. Lord Ambrose Burke did not have to be cornered, because Lord Ambrose Burke had a price, and a man with a price is not an enemy, only a transaction that has not yet been arranged. Marchbanks arranged it. She knew him of old, as she knew everyone of old, and she brought him to the grey house herself under a promise of safe conduct that Harry honored by having the wards stand down for exactly the length of the meeting, and not 1 minute more, which Burke noticed and approved of, because a man who keeps his wards on a clock is a man who can be dealt with. He was round and shrewd and beautifully dressed in the manner of a person who has bought his way up and means everyone to see the receipts, and he sat at the long table and looked at the 7 rings on the child's hands and got, Harry saw, straight to the arithmetic, which made him the most restful visitor Harry had received. "Ashstone," Burke said, "you'll be wanting it back. The vote, the toll, all of it. I paid for it fair, mind. Archive sale, lapsed parcel, every stamp in order. I didn't forge a thing and I didn't marry a corpse. I bought a dead house's leavings at a public sale because nobody else wanted them, and I made them pay because that is what I do, and there is no law against being the only man at the table who could see the value of a thing." He spread his baringed hands. "But you're going to win, aren't you? I can count 2, lad. The knife in the ministry settled it, so what's the offer?" Because I'd sooner sell you Ashdown back at a fair price today than have it stripped off me for nothing at your hearing and be left looking like one of Malfoy's fools into the bargain. That's exactly the offer, Harry said. I'm not Selwyn and I'm not Malfoy. You bought a parcel at a legal sale and got told it was clean. You're a thief on my books because it was mine and you've had the toll off it for years, but you're the kind of thief who can hand it back and walk away and the other kind can't. So here's the deal, and it's the only one, and I won't move off it because moving off it teaches everyone I move. He laid it out the way Vardek had taught him, plainly, with the price on the table. You return Ashdown, the seat and the toll, today in writing, witnessed by the bank. You repay what you took on a schedule the goblins set, which won't ruin you, because I don't need you ruined, I need you alive and grateful. And in exchange you keep your name out of the dock, you keep your other business, and you do one thing for me at the hearing. Which is, you tell the truth about the archive sale, how the lapsed parcels are listed, who decides a house is lapsed, who signs the sheet that says a seat is dead and ready to be sold cheap to whoever's standing there, because somebody does, Lord Burke. Somebody in that registry has been ruling houses dead so they can be sold or pooled, and you've bought from him, and you know how it works from the buyer's side, and the buyer's side is exactly the part nobody's ever heard. Harry looked at him. You don't have to accuse anyone, just tell the room how the sausage is made, the room will do the rest. And if Malfoy comes to me before your hearing, Burke said, as he will the moment he hears I've been seen on your lane and offers me twice your price to keep my mouth shut and my Ashdown where it is. Men like Lucius do not lose a brick from the wall quietly. He'll buy me back if he can. He'll offer you money, Harry agreed. I'm offering you survival. Those aren't the same market. Malfoy can make you richer. He can't make you not be the one who held a stolen seat when the whole thing came down, because that part's already true, and the only question left is which side of the table you're on when the bank starts collecting. He's selling you a better view from a building that's on fire. I'm selling you the door. Harry made a small, economical shrug. Take his money if you like. But you'll have spent it defending a forgery and a marriage fraud and 2 centuries of voting corpses, and when that's read in the open, the money won't buy your name back, and a merchant who has lost his name has lost the only thing he actually sells. You know that better than I do. You priced it the second you came up the lane. Burke looked at the child for a long moment, and then he laughed, a rich, genuine bark of a laugh, and slapped the table. Griselda, he said to Marchbanks, you have found yourself a merchant in a schoolboy's jumper. He's offering me my life and my purse for a story I'd tell at a dinner party for free. He turned back to Harry, and the shrewdness in him had shifted into the look a trader gives a worthy opposite number. Done, Lord Peveril. Ashdown back, the toll repaid, and I'll tell your room precisely how a house gets ruled dead and put up for sale, names of clerks and all, because I've nothing to lose by it and a great deal of standing to gain by being the first rat off the right ship. He stood and offered his hand, and Harry shook it, and that was the first crack in the block, sealed not with an oath but with a handshake between a merchant and a child who both understood that a good deal is the only loyalty that never lies. Dumbledore found the same thread Harry had found, because Dumbledore was nobody's fool, and he found it in the same place, the place where the dates did not agree, and what it did to him was the quiet, terrible thing that happens to a good man who discovers he has been a pillar of the building he despises. Marchbanks told Harry about it afterward, because Marchbanks had been there, summoned to the Chief Warlock's office 2 nights before the hearing by a note in a hand she had known for 60 years. He had the voting record open on his desk, she said. Not the bank's roll, he could not get the bank's roll, but the chamber's own record and a list in his own hand of every time the office of the Chief Warlock had cast a vacant ancient suffrage, the Peveril among them, for the good of the body. And he had sat there, the most powerful wizard in the world, looking at his own neat handwriting, and he had said to her quietly, Griselda. How many of these did I cast on the same side as the convocation, believing I was the solitary voice of conscience, when I was in truth merely the most respectable vote in a block of corpses? And what did you say to him? Harry asked. I told him the truth, because he has had enough lies from clever men to last an age, and what he needed was an old woman who would not flatter him. Marchbanks's ancient face was unreadable. I said, all of them, Albus. Every time you held the first voice in trust and cast it where you thought the good lay, you were a stone in their wall, because they had already arranged the question so that the good lay where they needed your vote to fall. You did not vote with thieves by accident a dozen times in 50 years. You voted with them because they built the votes for you to win, and let you feel the winning was conscience. You have been the most honest man in a rigged game, and the rigged game has used your honesty as its alibi for 200 years, because who would believe a chamber was corrupt when Albus Dumbledore kept losing to it so nobly? Harry was quiet. What did he do? He took off his spectacles, Marchbanks said, and he cleaned them, which is what he does when he cannot let his face be seen, and when he put them back on he said one thing, and then he sent me away. She looked at Harry with the full, undivided attention she had given him only once before, on the day she decided he was real. He said, then I have spent 50 years being right in a manner precisely calculated to keep me from ever being effective, and a child has done more damage to them in 3 weeks than I have done in half a century, and I find I must decide at my age whether I would rather be the conscience of a corrupt chamber or the end of it." She let it sit. "I do not know which he will choose, Lord Peveril," he did not say, "but I have known that man through 2 wars, and I will tell you this for nothing. The most dangerous he has ever been is not when he is certain. It is when he has just discovered he was wrong. A man like that, newly wrong, will move mountains to be right again, and the question that should keep you up tonight is not whether he moves them, it is which way." Harry sat with that for a long time after she had gone, turning it as he turned everything, looking for the milled edge. A man newly wrong, who would move mountains to be right again. He could see both mountains from where he sat. If Dumbledore decided to be the conscience of the chamber, he would counsel patience and committees and reform in good time, gently, and he would be, without ever meaning it, the most effective defender the Convocation had, because no one could call a thing corrupt that Albus Dumbledore was patiently working to improve from within. And if Dumbledore decided to be the end of the chamber, he would arrive at the hearing as the most powerful ally a child had ever had, and Harry would win, and would spend the rest of his life owing the win to a man who had buried his parents' will for his own good and would never quite stop believing he knew best. Neither was safe. Harry wrote both down in the head ledger on opposite pages, and under both he wrote the only rule that covered them: do not build the plan on which way he jumps. Build it so it wins whichever way he jumps. He said as much to Marchbanks the next morning, and the old woman looked at him over Hespa's tea and said, "You are declining to be rescued by the most powerful wizard alive on the chance the rescue arrives with strings. Do you know how many men twice your age would sell a hand for that rescue and never count the cost?" "All of them," Harry said. "That's how they end up owned. A rescue you can't pay for isn't a rescue, it's a mortgage." He pushed his glasses up. "I'll take his help if he gives it free in the open with no strings I can find. I won't plan on it. If he turns up tomorrow on my side, good. If he turns up on the fence being wise, I still win because the books win without him. I'm not going to make the one mistake everyone in that chamber has already made." "And what mistake is that precisely?" "Mistaking the kindest man in the room for a safe one," Harry said. "He told me himself he wasn't." "I usually believe people about the bad parts." They came for the evidence the night before the hearing, which Harry had expected, because the evidence was now the only thing that mattered and the seats were not, and men who cannot reach a child will always settle for reaching the proof. Harry had known it would come that night, because that night was the last night it could. After the hearing, the books would be read into the public record, and a thing in the public record cannot be burned out of the world. You would have to burn every mouth that heard it. The only window left for the fire was the dark before the reading, and so Harry did not sleep in his own bed but sat up in the strong room with the 2 books and the Folly Assay and the 7 Rings. And Hespa sat with him holding a kitchen knife she plainly did not know how to use, and the goblin warders stood in the dark at the edges of the old house's wards, and everyone understood without saying it that the night before a thing is read aloud is the night the men who do not want it read run out of clever options. They did not come over the wards which could not be crossed. They came under them by the one road the wards did not watch, because no wizard could travel it, and so no wizard had thought a wizard could. They came by the goblin road, or tried to, having bought or blackmailed a key to it, and that was the mistake, because the goblin road belonged to the goblins, and a wizard on the goblin road uninvited is a trespasser in a place that does not forgive trespass. And the road told Griffook the moment the intruder set foot on it, the way Hespa's house told her when the kettle boiled. There were 2 of them, professionals, curse-breakers by trade and by the tools they carried, and they came up into the strong room in the dead middle of the night meaning to burn 2 books and leave, and they found the strong room not empty. It was fast and it was ugly, and Harry, who had been woken by Hespa and brought to the strong room door against every protest, because he had told them he would not be kept from the things that were done in his name, saw most of it through the gap of the door, and understood that he would carry the seeing for a long time. He will not describe it here in full. A curse-breaker's curses are made to open ancient vaults, and a thing made to open a vault does terrible work on a body, and one of the goblin warders took such a curse across the chest holding the strongroom threshold, and did not let go of the threshold, and the road behind the intruders closed at Vardek's word, so that there was nowhere for them to run back to. And it ended with 2 professionals bound in goblin chain on the strongroom floor, and a warder breathing in a way that no one wanted to listen to, and the 2 books, the voting record and the master roll, untouched on the table, because the warder had stood between the fire and the proof and had counted the proof as worth more than the breath it cost him to save it. Harry knelt by the warder while the goblin healer worked, and he did not say anything stupid, and he did not look away, because looking away would have been a way of telling the warder that what he had done was too terrible to be witnessed, and a thing done for you should always be witnessed. The warder's eyes found Harry's, and the warder said something in the goblin tongue that Harry did not know, and Griffook beside him translated it without being asked in a voice gone flat and strange. "He says," Griffook said, "the books are whole. He says, tell the young lord the books are whole, and tell him to read them loudly tomorrow so that the breath was not spent for nothing." "Tell him I will," Harry said. "Tell him I'll read every line. Tell him the breath bought the loudest reading that room has ever heard, and I'll make sure everyone knows what it cost by name in the record forever." The warder heard the translation, and something in the ruined face eased, and the healer's hands kept moving, and the cost, the bank would say later, was paid, and the account, by the terrible arithmetic the bank lived by, still balanced, because the thing it had bought was worth the thing it had cost, and there is no higher praise a ledger can give. Harry stayed in the strong room while the healer worked, because he had said he would not be kept from what was done in his name, and he meant to be a person who kept that, even when keeping it cost him the sight of what a curse-breaker's curse does to a body that will not move out of its way. He held one of the warder's hands, which was cold and hard and three-fingered, and he did not let go, and he did not perform a comfort he could not give, and he did the one true thing in his power, which was to stay and count the warder's breaths and let the warder see they were being counted by someone who would remember the number. Somewhere in the long hour he understood, with the flat clarity that had stood in place of feeling his whole short life, that this was the real price the goblins had named in the Chamber of Ledgers, the one the contract had spelled out and he had signed under anyway, not his own danger, other people's blood, spent on his account with his name in the ledger as the reason. It was a heavier coin than the one he had thought he was carrying, and he made himself feel the weight of it once on purpose all the way down, because a debt you refuse to feel is a debt you will let someone else keep paying. By dawn the two curse-breakers had been delivered, bound and witnessed, to a ministry that could not pretend they had not been caught, and the warder would live, the healer said, which meant the cost had a bottom to it after all. And Harry Potter stood in the strong room in the gray first light with the two books under his arm and the falsified page of the convocations voting open on top, the dead house crouchly casting its fourth vote from beyond the grave in faded official ink, and he did not make a speech, because there was no one to make it to who did not already understand, and a speech would only have been for him. He closed the book over the page once to keep it safe for the room, and he said to Griffook, to Hespa, to the breathing warder, to the 7 rings on his own small hands, the only thing the morning asked of him, "Right, let's go and read it to them." Chapter 5 and Chapter 6, Points of Order. On the morning of the hearing, Harry counted his assets one last time, because counting his assets was how he kept his hands steady, and steady hands were the only thing he could control and therefore the only thing worth managing. He had the 2 books, the voting record and the master roll, sealed by the bank and witnessed. He had the folly assay, the ink older than the lie inside it. He had Burke, flipped, and willing. He had the statute, which no one had read aloud in living memory and which said in plain old words that he was right. He had Marchbanks, who would not lie to him, and Vardek, who would spend blood to keep the contract, and Hespa, who had sat up all night taking in a dead lord's robe, so that a child would not walk into the oldest court in the world wearing a cupboard's leavings. And he had the 7 rings, which had each reached into him and read him to the bottom and decided he would do. What he did not have was the one thing every adult in the building took for granted, the assumption that the room would, in the end, be fair to him. He had grown up without that assumption, and he found that morning that its absence was a kind of armor. The lords filing into the chamber believed, most of them, that the system was basically sound and had merely been embarrassed. They would be slow, because they would keep expecting it to right itself. Harry expected nothing of the kind. He expected the room to do exactly what it had been built to do, which was protect the people who already held it, and he had built every move on that expectation, and a plan built on the truth does not flinch when the truth arrives. "You will be frightened in there," Marchbanks told him in the corridor, not unkindly, while the great doors were drawn back. "Everyone is the first time the pit is designed for it. Do not waste effort pretending you are not. Spend the effort on the next sentence." "I'm not going to pretend anything," Harry said. "Pretending is their whole game. I'm going to do the thing they can't, which is say what's true and let it cost what it costs." He looked at the dark mouth of the doorway. "They built a room to make people feel small. I've felt small my whole life. It might be the one room in the world I'm actually trained for." And he walked in. The oldest courtroom in the wizarding world was built to make a person feel small, and it had 400 years of practice, and it did its work on everyone who entered it except the 2 people in the chamber who had already decided not to let it. It was a deep stone pit ringed with tiers, the benches rising up into a gloom that the torches never quite reached, so that a person standing at the bottom could not see the top row and was meant to imagine it full of judgment. The plum-colored robes of the Wizengamot filled the lower tiers, 50-odd lords and a scattering of clerks, and the air smelled of cold stone and old wax and the particular staleness of a room where important decisions had been made badly for a long time. At the high seat sat the chief warlock, Albus Dumbledore, in robes the color of a deep evening, his face giving away nothing, which Harry had learned to read as the most expensive nothing in the building. Harry came in at the bottom where the accused stood because that was where they had put the chair, and the chair was an adult's chair with chains worked into its arms, a thing built to hold prisoners, and someone had chosen it on purpose so that a child would either be swallowed by it or have to be lifted into it, and either way would look like what they wanted him to look like, which was small. Harry did not sit in it. He stood beside it in a robe Hespa had altered all night from one of the dead lord's own, plain and dark and a little too long, with the 7 rings on his hands catching what light there was. And he looked up at the tiers he could not see the top of, and he waited, and the waiting was the first move, because a chamber that has prepared to swallow a child who comes in already beaten does not know what to do with one who simply stands and looks at it and seems, quietly, to be counting it. The tiers were not empty of friends, but the friends were few, and Harry found them quickly, because finding the allies in a hostile room was a thing his whole childhood had trained him to do. Marchbank stood at his side, upright on her stick. Vardek sat at the witness table with the bank's iron-bound apparatus laid out before him, blank vellum and black quill in the open where the whole chamber could see there was no trick in them. Higher up among the plum robes, Ambrose Burke sat with the comfortable stillness of a man who has already changed sides and means everyone to notice. Along the press bench, quills were scratching before anyone had spoken, because a child at the bottom of the prisoner's pit was a story whatever happened next. And everywhere else in the rows climbing up into the dark sat the lords of the block and the marsh, and they looked down at him the way comfortable people examine an inconvenience, and Harry looked back up and let them examine and counted in his head the votes he could see and the votes he could not, and waited for someone to begin. "The claimant will be seated," said a clerk. "The claimant will stand," said Harry, "because the chair's got chains on it and I haven't been convicted of anything, and a man who sits in a prisoner's chair before anyone's accused him of a crime has agreed to the crime before it's named. I'll stand. Madam Marchbank speaks for me where the law says a child can't. Keeper Vardek witnesses for the bank, and I'll answer anything anyone wants to ask me in my own voice because I'm told the first voice means I get one." A sound went around the tiers, low, the sound of 50 lords discovering at once that the thing they had prepared to manage had its own ideas. Harry took the moment the murmur bought him. He had learned, in a house where the wrong word cost a meal, to read a room before he spent a word in it, and this one read clearly enough. They had come prepared to manage a cowering child or a goblin's puppet, and they had got neither, and the gap between what they had braced for and what stood in front of them was the only ground he owned in the whole chamber, and he meant to stand on it for as long as it would hold his weight. Lucius Malfoy did not stand to attack him, because Lucius Malfoy never did his own cutting in public. A lawyer rose instead, a sleek man named Yaxley with a voice like old rope, and he addressed the high seat as though the child at the bottom of the pit were a draft from a window someone should really see to. "Chief Warlock, my lords. We are met to consider a thing without precedent, that 7 of the most ancient seats of this body, ruled extinct, some of them before the present hall was raised, are to be resurrected en masse and bestowed upon a single child, on the word of a goblin bloodright our own examiners cannot verify, brought by a sponsor whose loyalties are, shall we say, a matter of public memory." A ripple of the right kind of laughter. "We say this proceeding should not be heard at all. We move to dismiss on 3 grounds, and I will be brief because the matter scarcely deserves length." He raised one finger, standing. "A child of 8 cannot in law bring an action, and a sponsor cannot lend a standing the principal does not own." 2. A second finger. "Form. The writs rest upon a foreign record, the goblin roll, which our law requires be confirmed by a wizarding examiner before it may found any claim, and no such confirmation exists." 3. The third finger, and the voice went silken. "Prudence. Should the body wish to indulge this novelty despite its defects, it should do so in closed committee, away from the dignity of the full chamber, where senior lords of experience may weigh it soberly and spare us all a spectacle. We ask that the writs be struck, or failing that, referred. The claimant, after all, is a child. Surely no one in this hall wishes to see a child made the instrument of a goblin grievance." He sat. It was, Harry thought, very well done. It had put the word goblin in the air 4 times and the word child 3, and it had offered the lords a way to bury the whole thing while feeling protective doing it. Marchbanks rose slowly on her stick, and the chamber quieted for her the way a room quiets for the oldest person in it, whether it respects her or not. 3 grounds, she said. Let us take them in the order council was good enough to number them, since he is plainly proud of the counting. Standing. The law that a minor cannot bring an action is real, and it is precisely why a sponsor exists, which counsel knows, having used 3 of them himself before his beard came in. I bring the action. My standing is not in question. I have sat this chamber 60 years, which is longer than counsel has been alive to be disappointing in it. Ground 1 fails on its own statute. Form. She let the word sit. Counsel says our law requires the goblin record be confirmed by a wizarding examiner. I invite counsel in the chamber to name the statute that says so. Take your time. I will wait. I have waited for worse. Silence. Yaxley conferred unhurried with the air of a man certain the statute existed in content to let the old woman strain. The silence went on a little too long for that certainty. There is no such statute, Marchbanks said, because the requirement council describes is not law, it is habit, dressed as law, which is the chamber's favorite costume. As for council's third ground, his prudence, his tender wish to spare the chamber a spectacle by referring the matter to a closed committee of senior lords, I will be blunt, my lords, being too old for the other thing. A closed committee of senior lords is a private room owned by the very men whose conduct is in question, and to send this matter there is to ask the accused to judge themselves behind a shut door and hand us the verdict afterward. If this body has nothing to hide, it will hear the thing in the open where it sits. If it has something to hide, then the spectacle council fears is precisely the spectacle the public is owed, and as it happens, the question of which record proves a lineage is governed by a statute, a real one very old, and the claimant wishes it read. She turned for the first time to the child at the bottom of the pit. Lord Peveril, you hold a privilege that bears on this. I believe you mean to use it. I do, said Harry. He had practiced the words, not because he could not have found them in the moment, but because some words are too important to be left to the moment, and he wanted them exact. I hold the House of Wilt, Harry said into the deep stone quiet, and the House of Wilt holds the law speaker's demand. I've read what it does. It says the Lord of Wilt, or his sworn voice, can require that any law touching a question before this body be read aloud, in full, from the true record before the question goes further, and that while it's read, nothing else in the chamber moves. He looked up at the tiers. Council says my writs are defective on form. There's a statute that decides whether they are. It's the statute of resumption, and the true copy lives in the registry, and I'd like it read out loud, all of it, by the clerk who keeps it. Invoking the demand, everything stops until the law is read. The effect was not loud, it was the opposite of loud. It was the particular silence of 50 people realizing simultaneously that a door they had assumed was painted shut had just been opened from the inside, and that the child had been holding the handle the entire time. The demand is recognized, said Dumbledore from the high seat, and it was the first time he had spoken, and his voice was mild and carried to every corner without effort. It is an ancient privilege of the House of Wilt, and it is lawfully invoked by its lord. The chamber is frozen. The clerk of the registry will produce the true copy of the statute of resumption and read it in full. A pause, and the mild blue eyes moved without hurry to a neat gray man in the clerk's row. Mr. Pricklewill, the chamber waits. Harry watched Odo Pricklewill rise. He watched the careful gray man walk to the lectern with the row of quills on his breast going up and down with his breathing, and he watched him be handed by a junior the true copy of a statute that Pricklewill himself had spent 30 years making sure no one would ever ask to hear, and he watched the clerk's hands as he opened it, because the hands were where the truth was, and the hands were not steady. Pricklewill read. He read in a flat gray voice, and at first the chamber was restless, because old statutes are tedious and the lords had expected to be bored. And then the chamber stopped being restless, because the statute was not what they had been told it was. It said in the dry plain words of 400 years before, that no house holding a seat upon the body could be ruled extinct by any authority save the death of its last carrier of the blood, that the writing of the word extinct in any roll was an administrative note and not an extinguishment, that a dormant seat resumed its full force the instant a carrier of the blood claimed it, with no confirmation required beyond the proof of blood by the method the body itself had adopted by treaty. That no seat once held could be sold, pooled, granted, or voted by any other house or office while a carrier of its blood lived unclaimed, on pain of the restoration of all rights and revenues to the lawful heir. The clerk's voice got grayer and flatter as he read, because every clause he read was a clause he had buried, and he was being made to dig each one up with his own mouth in front of the body, and lay it on the table where it disproved, line by line, the entire procedure his masters had built. When he finished there was no sound at all. "Thank you, Mr. Pricklewill," Harry said into the silence, politely, because politeness here was a blade. "That's the law. It says a house isn't dead because somebody wrote dead next to it. It says my seats came back to full force the second I claimed them, and that nobody needed to confirm anything except my blood, by the goblin method which the body adopted itself by treaty, which the bank can show you. And it says," he let this part land slowly, "that anybody who sold or pooled or voted one of my seats while I was alive and unclaimed has to give back everything they took. That's not Madame Marchbanks's opinion. That's not a goblin grievance. That's the statute," in the clerk's own voice read off the true copy. "Council said my writs were defective on form. The law he was counting on says the opposite. It always said the opposite. It just hadn't been read out loud in a very long time." Marchbanks did not let the silence settle into something the chamber could recover from. She turned it, while it was still raw, into a witness. "My lords, you have heard the law. You may wish to hear how it was broken, from a man who profited by the breaking and has come to tell you how the trick is done. Lord Ambrose Burke." Burke rose from the third tier, round and beautifully dressed, with the unbothered air of a man who has worked out which way the wind blows and dressed for it. Murmur went through the block. He had been one of theirs a week ago. I'll be brief since brevity's been so admired this morning, Burke said, with the glance an old card player gives a man across the table. I held the seat of Ashton, bought it, archive sale, lapsed parcel, every stamp in order, and I'll tell you exactly what that means because none of you who haven't bought one would know. When a house goes quiet, somebody in the registry writes the word the lad's been on about, extinct, lapsed. And the moment that word is written, the house's rights become a parcel, and a parcel can be sold off cheap, or if it carries a voting seat, folded into the committee that votes the vacancies for the good of the body. He let the phrase fall with the ease of a man who had used it himself. Now here is the part you are meant never to ask. Who decides a house is lapsed? Not this chamber, you never see it. A clerk decides. A clerk writes extinct in the roll, and a seat that the law we just heard says cannot die without the death of its blood dies anyway, on a clerk's say-so, and gets sold or pooled before any heir could object, because the whole arrangement depended on the heirs having been ruled not to exist. He turned unhurried toward the clerk's row, toward the neat gray man still rigid at the lectern. I bought my parcel from that office. So did a great many of you, my lords, though you will not say so aloud. And when word got about this week that I had been seen on a certain lane in Surrey, I had a visit. A generous one, twice the lad's price to keep my Ashton and my mouth both shut. I am a merchant. I know the difference between a man buying my silence and a man who is safe, and the one who came to me was not safe. He inclined his head to the high seat. I have returned Ashton to its lawful lord, the toll repaid on the bank's schedule. I would suggest the rest of you begin counting what you will owe. The boy already has. He sat, and the silence he left was a different silence than before. The first had been the law falling on them. This was each lord in the block privately pricing his own exposure, and the sound of that arithmetic, though it made no sound at all, was the loudest thing in the chamber. Harry let it run a moment, and then he spent it. There's one more thing the chamber should see, he said, because the statute says any seat sold or pooled while my blood lived has to be given back, and one of mine wasn't only sold, it was forged away. I can prove it, and I'd rather prove it here than let anyone say later I only claimed it. He nodded to Vardek, who laid upon the table the original Follius sheet, the bank's dated record of the last Folly's death, and the sealed strip of the goblin assay. This paper says the house of Folly died and its levy passed onward, Harry said. It's dated 11 days before the last Folly died. You can't escheat a house that still has a living member, so the date alone is wrong, but dates can be argued, ink can't. He looked up at the tears. The bank's assay reads the age of ink the way the blood quill reads a line. The body of this escheat is 200 years old. The clause granting the Folly levy onward is 200 years old in the parchment and 19 years old in the ink. Somebody took a real old escheat and added the grant a lifetime later, fresh ink on old skin. And the workshop that milled that ink kept a sales ledger, the way honest tradesmen do, and the bank has read it, and the buyer of that exact ink, 19 years ago in that exact season, was a steward of the House of Malfoy. Yaxley was up at once, smooth as oil, objecting that the present hearing concerned the claimant's writs and not the conduct of any noble house, that so grave a charge required its own proceeding, that this was prejudicial and irregular, and he was on the law entirely correct, and Harry let him be correct, because being correct on the procedure while the whole chamber stared at the word forged was the worst ground a lawyer could hold. Counsel's right, Harry said, before the high seat could rule. This isn't the hearing for it. I'm not asking you to try anyone today. I'm entering it into the record so that when the accounting the statute requires is done, the Follius sheet is in front of the auditors with its ink date attached, and nobody has to pretend the seat just happened to lapse. That's all. The record can hold it until the right room is ready. He stepped back. I can wait. I've got 14 days and a long memory, and so does the bank. It was Selwyn who broke, which Harry had thought it might be, because the fading reactionary had the least left to lose and the worst grip on it. This is monstrous, Selwyn said, surging up from the second tier, his chamber-filling voice gone shrill. We are to be lectured on law by a Surrey child and a bank of goblins and that old woman. I have held the seat of Gamp for you've held the seat of Gamp on a marriage that produced a hidden child, which means it wasn't the marriage you registered, Harry said, not loudly, but the chamber had gone so quiet that not loudly was enough. And you voted it with the block, which you told me yourself on my own ground in front of witnesses who'll swear to it. I didn't bring that up. You did just now, thank you. Selwyn stood with his mouth open and the color climbing his neck in the dawning of a man who has run onto the second knife reaching out for the first one, and around him, very subtly, the lords nearest him on the bench lined away, the physical confession of people deciding which way the weather has turned. Lord Selwyn will sit, said Dumbledore mildly, or Lord Selwyn will be seated, and Selwyn sat because the second option had teeth in it, and the chamber understood that the chief warlock had just declined in front of everyone to protect a member of the block, and that the declining was itself a kind of verdict. Yaxley rose again, smoother than ever, because a good lawyer is never better than when he is losing. The statute is noted, he said, as though it had been a minor clarification rather than the floor falling out. It does not, however, dispose of the central question which remains the goblin record, the blood right. We have only the bank's word that this child carries these 7 lines. The bank, my lords, is an interested party. It would say a great deal to place 14 votes in a hand it alone can reach. Cannot found the gravest constitutional act in 2 centuries on the unverified word of, then verify it, Marchbanks said. Here, now, in front of the body. Yaxley paused. It was a small pause, but Harry saw it and filed it because it was the pause of a man who had been so sure the test could not be done that he had built his whole attack on its impossibility. The goblin method, Marchbanks went on, is not a thing the goblins do in the dark and ask us to trust. It is a public right. It was adopted by this body by treaty 4 centuries ago, and the treaty hangs framed in the corridor outside this very chamber, signed by a chief warlock whose portrait is on that wall behind you. Keeper Vardek has brought the apparatus. Let the rite be performed before all of you on this child this hour. If the blood lies, you will see it lie, and the writs collapse, and I will apologize on my knees, which at my age would be a memorable sight. If the blood does not lie, she spread her thin hands, then we may all stop pretending this is a question of evidence, and admit it is a question of whether this chamber would rather follow its own law or its own habit. They performed the rite in the pit, in front of 50 lords who craned from the tiers to see. Vardek did it himself with the same blank vellum and the same black quill, and he narrated each step in his flat, exacting voice so that no one could later claim a trick, and he had 2 lords of the chamber chosen at random come down and witness the quill at close range, and one of them was a known man of the block, which Marchbanks had insisted upon, so that the block could not say afterward that only friends had watched. Harry gave 3 drops, as he had the first time, in the chamber of ledgers 300 feet down, and the prick was nothing, and the blank vellum drank the blood and shivered, and the chamber, which had been a place of murmurs and old voices, went silent in a new way. The silence of 50 people watching a thing they had been told could not be done begin in front of them to be done, the red letters crawling out across the vellum 1 house at a time where every eye could follow. And the 7 names wrote themselves out in the hand 400 years dead, P-V-E-R-E-L-L, Gamp, F-A-W-L-E-Y, A-S-H-G-O-W-N, W-L-L-T, S-A-Y-R-E, C-A-R-A-D-O-C, and the braided tree grew down the page to a single name at its foot, and the block's own chosen witness, the lord who had come down to find the trick, straightened up from the vellum with his face gone the color of the stone and said, because he was an honest man caught in a dishonest hour and the right did not leave him anywhere to stand, it is true, the lines are true, I have examined the quill and the parchment and there is no trick, the child is what he says. Yaxley tried once more because it was his function, and because a block that has paid for a lawyer expects him to go on talking until the floor is entirely gone. He rose and observed with the unsinkable calm of his trade that the rite, however striking, had been performed by a goblin using goblin apparatus, and that the chamber might still wish to appoint its own examiners to repeat it under controlled conditions over some appropriate span of weeks. Counsel, said Marchbanks, asked an hour ago that we not found a constitutional act upon an unverified right. We verified it before the whole body, with one of his own block holding the quill to the light. Now counsel asks for weeks to verify the verification. There is a word, my lords, for a man who demands proof receives it, and at once demands proof of the proof, and the word is not lawyer, it is stall. He is buying days. Ask yourselves why a man buys days and what he intends to do with them, and whether this chamber wishes to be the instrument of it. She sat, and Yaxley, for the first time all morning, did not rise again at once, and the not rising said more than anything he had. And then the chamber understood all at once the thing that the statute and the right together meant, and Harry watched the understanding move across the tiers like wind across a field, because the lords were not fools, they had only been comfortable, and comfort and stupidity are different things that look alike until the floor moves. 7 seats, real, confirmed, lawful, and one of the 7 was Peveril, the first voice, which spoke before all others and broke every tie. The block had ruled this chamber for 2 centuries on 26 living votes and a sheaf of corpses, and the corpses were about to be struck from the roll, and 7 new votes were about to be added against them. And at the center of the 7 sat a casting vote that meant that on any close question ever again, the deciding hand would belong to a child in a dead man's robe who could not be bought, could not be married, could not be cowed, and could not, it was turning out, be killed quickly enough. The majority that ran the wizarding world had not been reduced. It had been ended in an afternoon by arithmetic, and every lord in the block did the same sum at the same moment and arrived at the same answer, which was written plainly on 50 faces. It's gone. The whole thing is gone, which left the chief warlock and the ruling and the hinge on which everything turned. Dumbledore had said almost nothing through the whole of it. He had recognized the demand and frozen the chamber and declined to shield Selwyn, but he had not tipped his hand on the only question that finally mattered, which was whether the writs were admissible for full seating, because that ruling was his to make, and a man who had spent 50 years as the most honest stone in the wall now had to decide in front of everyone whether to keep being the wall. Harry looked up at the high seat and understood that he could not win this part. He could only wait and see which mountain the old man moved. He had built the plan so it survived either way. The books were in the record now, the statute read, the right witnessed, and even a ruling against him would only push the fight to appeal with all his proof intact. But he had not been able to make this part not matter. It mattered. He stood at the bottom of the pit and looked up and did not perform anything at all, and let the most powerful wizard in the world look at him and decide. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. Then he removed his half-moon spectacles and cleaned them, which Harry now knew was the thing he did when he could not let his face be seen, and when he put them back on the chamber had gone utterly still, because they all knew it too. They had all watched him do it for 50 years, and they knew it meant the old man had finished deciding something large. "The law has been read," Dumbledore said. "It was read by the clerk who keeps it from the true copy at the lawful demand of the Lord of Wilt, and it is plain, and it is old, and it does not bend to our convenience or to mine. The blood has been proven before us all by the method this body adopted by its own treaty, witnessed by a lord of no friendship to the claimant. I find the writs of resumption valid. I find the 7 houses living, their seats resumed, their rights restored from the date of filing." A sound began in the tears, and he let it rise and then stilled it with one raised hand. "I find further that every seat of the claimants that has been sold, pooled, or voted by another while its blood lived unclaimed must, by the statute we have just heard, be accounted for, and the rights and revenues restored, and I direct the registry to begin that accounting under the bank's audit, and I will hear no motion to delay it." A murmur tried to rise at that, the murmur of lords realizing that the accounting would reach their own vaults, and the old man let it climb and then put it down with 2 words: "Begin it." The mild eyes moved down to the pit to Harry, and the warmth was there, and so was the steel, both at once, neither hidden. "The claimant is confirmed lord of 7 houses of this body." It was the conscience or the end choice, made in the open, and he had chosen the end, and Harry felt something he did not have a name for and did not reach for one, because the old man was not finished, and Harry had learned that Dumbledore was never more dangerous than in the half-second after he gave you what you wanted. "One matter remains," Dumbledore said, "which the law also requires, and which I will not pretend I raise unwillingly. The claimant is 8 years old. He cannot vote his own seats. The statute is as plain on that as on all the rest. A regent must hold his voice until his majority. I would counsel the chamber and the claimant that the regent be a person of standing whom this body can trust to wield 14 votes with wisdom, and I would offer, as I offered once before in a colder room, to serve in that office myself, that the child might grow in safety under a hand the storm cannot lift." And there it was, the last and softest snare, the giving and the keeping in a single breath, dressed this time in the authority of the high seat, where to refuse it would look like a child spurning the protection of the most trusted man alive. Harry did not hesitate, because he had decided this in a cold strongroom days before, when the old man was only a possibility on the opposite page of a head ledger. "Thank you," Harry said up into the gloom, "but no. I've already chosen my regent, and I chose her before today, so nobody can say I picked her because of how the afternoon went." He turned slightly to the old woman beside him. "Madame Griselda Marchbanks holds my voice until I'm of age. She doesn't want my seats, which means no one can outbid me for them. She's too old to be bribed with a future and too stubborn to be driven out of a present. And she's the only person in this whole business who told me on the first day that she wouldn't lie to me about what it cost." He looked back up at the high seat, and he said the next part without heat, because heat would have made it small. "You offered to hold my voice for my own good, sir. The last time someone held something of mine for my own good, it was my parents' will, and it stayed held for 7 years. I'm sure you meant this one better. But I've had enough of my own good being decided above my head. I'll keep the voice with someone who will hand it back." The chamber did not breathe. To say such a thing to Albus Dumbledore in the High Court as a child was a thing that had not been done in living memory, and half the lords flinched on the old man's behalf and the other half on Harry's. Dumbledore looked down at him for a long moment. And then he inclined his head just slightly, the smallest possible bow, the courtesy a master swordsman gives an opponent who has touched him cleanly. "Madame Marchbanks is confirmed regent of the voice of the 7 houses," he said, "until the Lord's majority. The chamber so records it." And only Harry, who was watching the eyes, saw that the warmth in them had not dimmed at all, and that under it the steel had simply resheathed itself, patient, undefeated, already thinking 3 winters ahead. Harry let out a breath he had not been holding on purpose, and found his hands were steady after all, which was the only report he had wanted from them. He had won the part that could be won in a room, and he knew exactly what that was worth, which was everything and not enough. The law was his now, the record was public, the corpses would come off the roll and his 7 seats would go on it. But a man who has lost in the open is more dangerous than one who never expected to win, and Harry had just beaten the most dangerous men in the country in front of 50 witnesses, and men who have been beaten in public do not go home and take up gardening. They go home and count the same as he did, and they ask the same question he was already asking: what can still be done in 14 days? The full seating, the registry ruled, would come at the next session of the body, 14 days hence, when the 7 seats would be formally filled, the resumed votes added to the roll, the pooled corpses struck from it, and Lord Peveril's casting vote made live for the first time in 400 years. 14 days. Harry watched the date go into the great session ledger in the registrar's hand, struck through with the chamber's seal to fix it, and he thought about what 14 days were, long enough to count and long enough for the men whose majority had just died in front of them, to decide that a confirmed lord was harder to remove than an unconfirmed one, and that the window for removing him was closing fast. He was right about that. In the marble corridor outside, while the lords streamed past pretending not to stare, Lucius Malfoy stopped in front of Harry one more time and bowed and smiled the most expensive smile in the building, and said, for the benefit of everyone within earshot, "My congratulations, Lord Peveril, a historic day. The chamber has not seen its like, and I dare say it never will again." And then lower pitched for Harry alone, with the warmth never leaving his face. 14 days is a great deal of time, my lord, for some to come out wrong. Do enjoy them. He swept on before Harry could answer, which was the point, and Harry watched the pale head move away through the crowd without hurry, and he did not feel the thing the corridor wanted him to feel. He turned to Marchbanks and Vardak, and he said in the flat counting voice, "He's not going to try to stop the seating with law anymore. He can't. We beat the law is ours now, so he's going to try to make me unfit to be seated. A crime. Something they can pin on me before the session, so the same chamber that confirmed me has to unconfirm me, and it'll look like justice instead of murder." He pushed his glasses up his nose and looked at the closing doors of the oldest courtroom in the world. 14 days. We should find out what he's planting before he plants it. Because he just told me there's a clock, and a man only tells you about a clock when he's already started it. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. The 7th seat. On the morning of the seating, they came to arrest him before he reached the door, which Harry had been expecting for 14 days, and which therefore did not work. It came at the very threshold of the ministry, on the broad marble steps, in front of the largest crowd the building had drawn in a generation, because the seating of a child to 7 ancient seats was a thing the whole hidden world wanted to see. A senior Auror Harry did not know stepped into his path with 2 more behind him, and a roll of parchment in his hand, and the flat steadiness of an honest officer being used, and not yet certain of it. The Auror said it low for the 2 of them, but the steps were not a place for private words. The steps were packed. Word had run through the hidden world for a fortnight that today a child would be seated to 7 ancient seats, the like of which no living person had witnessed, and the onlookers had come in their hundreds, witches in traveling cloaks, wizards who had taken the morning from their work, families with children of their own brought to see it, and a long row of pressmen at the rail with their quills already moving. They had come for a coronation. They were about to be handed something a good deal better, which a crowd can always smell on the wind a moment before it arrives. The Auror had not chosen the steps for the arrest. Someone had chosen them for him, someone who wanted a child taken away in disgrace where the most eyes in the kingdom would see it done, so that by the time any question could be raised the picture would already be fixed, the upstart unmasked, the seats saved, order restored. It was, Harry thought, a good plan, and it carried the one flaw that ran through all of the pale man's plans like a crack through a bell, which was that it treated a crowd as scenery. A crowd is not scenery. A crowd gathered to watch a humiliation will watch, with precisely the same hunger, the humiliation of whoever staged it, and will not greatly care which way the wind turns out to blow so long as someone falls. Malfoy had built a stage and forgotten that a stage faces both ways. "Lord Peveril," the Auror said, "I'm sorry, we've had a sworn complaint and a search warrant, and the law says I have to act on both before you can be seated. There's a charge of trafficking in a proscribed dark artifact, and a sworn statement that the Gringotts blood record was fabricated by collusion between you and the bank. If either holds, you can't take a seat in that chamber, and I'm bound to hold you while it's tested." He lowered his voice. "I don't like the timing of it any more than you do. But it's sworn and it's stamped, and I haven't got the luxury of liking things." Marchbanks went very still beside him. Vardak, at Harry's other shoulder, did not move at all, which Harry had learned was the goblin equivalent of a sword being drawn. Harry looked at the warrant and then at the Auror's regretful, honest face, and he understood the shape of the whole thing at once, because it was the same shape as everything else. A soft, true man being used as the edge of a hard, false one, made to do the dirty work in good faith so that the dirty work would look clean. "What's the artifact?" Harry said, "and where did your sworn complaint say you'd find it?" "Cursed reliquary, proscribed under the Dark Objects Act." The Auror checked the parchment. "The complaint says it's hidden in the property you've been living in Surrey, behind the wards." "Behind the wards," Harry repeated, and he did not feel the thing the morning wanted him to feel, because he had been waiting for this exact sentence for 14 days, and a blow you have been waiting for lands on a guard already raised. "That's good, that's really good. Whoever wrote your complaint was clever. But they made one mistake, and it's the same mistake the pale man with the snake on his cane keeps making, which is that he doesn't understand what my wards are." He looked up at the Auror. You're an honest man and you've been handed a dirty job. So let's do the job properly in the open in front of all these people right now, and let's let the wards tell us who put the reliquary there. Because if it's behind my wards, then somebody crossed my wards to plant it, and my wards remember everyone who crosses them by name, by intent, by the hour. Send your people to Surrey. I'll come. Let's read the wards together. If I planted a dark object in my own house, the land will say so, and you can arrest me on these very steps, and I'll go quietly. And if somebody else planted it, he let it hang, then your sworn complaint is the crime, not me, and I'd like that read out loud too in front of everyone by the same law that swore it. The aura looked at him for a long moment. You're very calm, he said, for a man I've just threatened with a cell. I've had 14 days to be calm, Harry said. He gave them to me himself. He told me there was a clock. A man only tells you about a clock when he's already wound it, and a clock you can hear is a clock you can plan around. The aura looked from the child to the warrant to the crowd pressing at the rail, and he made the decision an honest officer makes when handed a dishonest job in front of witnesses, which is to do it so exactly that its dishonesty has nowhere left to stand. We'll read the wards, he said, loudly enough to carry all of us now. The court clerk comes, the press comes, and whatever the land has to say gets said where every soul on these steps can hear it. He rolled the warrant shut. If it proves yours, my lord, I'll walk you in from here and bear you no grudge for the trouble. And if it proves someone else's, and here his eyes went just once up the steps to a pale head that had arranged to be present for the morning's arrest and now stood very still indeed, then we will all of us learn together whose morning this was meant to be. They read the wards in front of the crowd, which was the thing Malfoy had not planned for, because Malfoy had planned for a quiet arrest and a disqualified child in an empty seat, and instead he got the whole spectacle dragged into the daylight he most wished to avoid. It was Hespa who read them in the end, because the wards of the House of Peveril answered to the House of Peveril, and Hespa was the house's oldest servant, and the goblins' warders stood with her and confirmed each thing she said in their flat, exacting voices, so that no one could call it an elf's loyalty talking. They went to Surrey by the lawful road, aurors and witnesses and a clerk of the court, and they found the cursed reliquary exactly where the complaint had said it would be, in a disused room of the grey house, behind the wards, proscribed and real and humming with the small wrongness of a thing made to do harm. That the reliquary lay where the complaint swore it would surprised no one on Harry's side of the garden wall. 14 days earlier, in a marble corridor, a child had said they should learn what Malfoy meant to plant before he planted it, and the goblins did not treat their lord's words as decoration. The wards had felt the cursebreaker cross the boundary on the second night before the seeding, in the dark, carrying exactly the intent the land had been built to taste. They had let him cross. They had let him find the disused room and hide his cursed thing and steal away again, well pleased with himself, because a trap is only a trap if it is permitted to close, and a planter caught mid-plant is worth 1,000 denials in a court of law. So when the aurors reached Surrey braced for a guilty child and a tidy disgrace, they found instead a house that had been waiting for them with its hands folded, and an old elf on the threshold who had kept the place 400 years and did not mean to be moved off it now by anyone in a ministry cloak. Hespa read the wards in the elf's own way, her thin hand flat to the doorframe and her great eyes shut, and she spoke what the land remembered, and the goblins' warders stood at her shoulders and confirmed each word in their flat, exacting voices, so that no court could afterward wave it away as an elf's love for her master. The crowd that had followed from the steps pressed against the garden wall. The court clerk's quill hung ready. Honest Auror stood over his bagged reliquary with his good faith hanging in the balance, and into that silence they put the one question the whole elaborate frame had been built to keep anyone from ever asking. And then they asked the land who had brought it there. The wards of an ancient house do not lie, any more than a goblin ledger lies, because they were made by the same hands in the same centuries for the same reason, which was that a world full of liars needs a few things in it that cannot be made to lie. The land had felt a stranger cross the boundary in the dark of the second night before the seeding. It had felt his intent, which had been to hide a thing where it would be found by others, and it had felt his name, because a house's wards take a name the way wax takes a seal, and it gave the name up now to its lord's servant in front of an honest Auror and a court clerk and a crowd that had come for a coronation and got a trial instead. The name was not Malfoy. Malfoy never did his own cutting. The name was a man on Malfoy's payroll, a cursebreaker, the surviving partner of the two who had come for the books, out on bail that Malfoy's gold had quietly arranged, and the wards had his name and the hour and the intent, and the clerk wrote it all down, and the honest Auror read it, and his face changed into something harder and cleaner, the face of a man who has just understood exactly whose tool he was nearly made. The complaint is false, the Auror said to the crowd, because the crowd was owed it. The artifact was planted. We have the planter by name, witnessed by the house's own wards, which the law has held good as evidence for 400 years. and a man does not plant a thing in a child's house and then swear a complaint to have it found unless someone paid him to, and I am going to find out who held the purse, and I have a very good guess, and so, I think, does everyone standing on these steps." The second blade in the frame was the forged confession, the sworn statement that the blood record had been fabricated, and that one Harry dismantled himself in the chamber, because the chamber was where it had been aimed, and the chamber was where it deserved to die. They let him into the seating after all, because a charge proven false on the threshold cannot keep a man from the door, and he came down into the deep stone pit one more time with the 7 rings on his hands and the whole Wizengamot above him in its tears, fuller than it had been for the validity hearing, because word had gone round that today the thing would either be finished or undone. The sworn statement was entered by Yaxley, who had the grace, at least, to look as though he wished he were elsewhere. It was a confession, supposedly written by a junior goblin of the bank, claiming the blood record had been faked, that the 7 lines were an invention, that the whole edifice was a goblin scheme to seize wizard seats. It was signed, it was sealed. It was on its face exactly the kind of thing that could unmake everything, because it came from inside the bank, and a betrayal from inside is the one accusation a defense cannot simply deny. "May I see it?" Harry said. They let him hold it under guard, and he read it, and then he passed it to Vardak, and Vardak laid the same thin grey wafer against the signature that had read the Folius cheat, and the wafer drank, and the chamber, which had learned in one afternoon what that wafer meant, leaned forward as one body. "This confession," Vardak said in his flat, exacting voice, "purports to be written by Griffith of the bank 3 days ago in remorse." He read the wafer the way Harry read a column. The hand is a fair copy of Griffith's hand. The ink is 19 years old in the parchment and 4 days old where the signature sits. It is the same trick as the Folius cheat, my lords, performed by the same kind of hand, because a forger who has succeeded once does not learn a second craft, he repeats the first, and there is a further difficulty. He set the wafer down. Griffith of the bank cannot have written a confession 3 days ago, in remorse or in anything else, because 3 days ago Griffith of the bank was lying under a goblin healer's hands with a cursebreaker's curse across his arm, taken in defense of the very record this paper says he faked, and 40 witnesses of the bank will swear to where he was and what it cost him. You cannot forge a confession from a creature whose blood was on the strong room floor defending the truth the confession denies. Forger did not know Griffith was hurt, because the forger was not there, because the forger was at his desk, 19 years deep in old ink, doing the only thing he has ever known how to do. The wafer passed down the frontier, lord to lord, each of them holding it to the torchlight and seeing the 2 ages of the ink lie plainly side by side, the 200-year parchment and the 4-day signature, the confession confessing in the one tongue that cannot be coached that it was itself the very forgery it named. No one rose to defend it. There was nothing in it to defend. A clever man may argue a witness and cross a document and muddy a memory, but no clever man yet born has found a way to argue with ink that has told the court its own birthday, and the quiet that followed was the quiet of 50 people watching a weapon turn in the hand that swung it. "I will say the obvious," Marchbank said into that quiet, "since this body so often needs it said. A forged confession is not a failed attack. It is a confession of a separate crime by whoever forged it. The question before us is no longer whether the blood record is true. We proved that a fortnight ago, and have now watched its only challenger expose itself as a fake before our eyes. The question is who keeps manufacturing paper to unmake a child, and how much longer this chamber means to pretend it cannot guess." And Griffith himself rose then from the witness bench, his arm still bound against his chest, and held it up so the chamber could see the binding, and said nothing at all, because nothing at all was the loudest thing he could have said. After that it came apart quickly, the way a wall comes apart once one stone is pulled, because it had only ever been a wall of stones and not a thing of one piece. Marchbanks rose and entered into the record the 2 books, the voting record and the master roll, and she had the relevant pages read aloud. The dead house crouchly casting its 4th vote from the grave, house mayor were 3 weeks in the ground voting on a tax. Sayer voted 31 times as a vacancy, and 11 of those after the last Sayer was provably dead. She read the certifications and the witnessing names, the living lords of the block whose seals stood on 2 centuries of fraud. She did not editorialize, she did not need to. She simply read the dates, the death on one side and the vote on the other, and let the chamber do the arithmetic that a child had done in one night in a strong room, and the arithmetic did to the block what it had done to Harry the first time, which was leave nowhere to stand. Selwyn tried to flee the chamber and was not permitted to, and in his scramble said 3 more things he should not have, each of which the clerk wrote down. He named a date he should not have known, and a sum he should not have been able to name, and a second lord besides, and then he heard the quality of the silence he had spoken into and understood, far too late, what he had done, and sat with his mouth still working. The lord he had named came up white from the 3rd tier to deny it, and in denying it named a 3rd, and the 3rd half rose before he caught himself, and that was the whole shape of the hour. each man's defense becoming the next man's accusation, the block devouring itself in the open because the only mortar that had ever bound it was the shared and now shattered certainty that none of them could be touched. Take that away and they were not a block at all. They were a row of men who had done the same thing and trusted the same silence, learning all at once and in front of everyone that the silence was over, and that the child at the bottom of the pit had not needed to accuse a single one of them, because he had only built a room in which they could not stop accusing each other. Two other lords of the block rose, white-faced, to disavow the convocation, to claim they had voted the vacancies in good faith, believing it lawful custom, which was very likely true and saved them nothing, because good faith is a defense to malice and not to arithmetic. Yaxley folded his papers and stopped rising, because there is a point past which even a paid voice will not speak, and the block had passed it. And Lucius Malfoy sat through all of it with his face arranged in perfect, expensive calm, because Lucius Malfoy was clever than the rest of them, and had built his own affairs so that no single document would ever quite reach him, and he was right. The folly ink led to a steward of his house and not provably to his hand, and the planted reliquary led to a cursebreaker on his payroll and not provably to his order, and the forged confession led to the same forger in the same gap, and through every collapsing certainty Malfoy sat and let the lesser men drown, certain that the water would not rise to his own chin. He was not wrong about the law, he was wrong about the room. "You won't go to prison," Harry said to him, not loudly, but the chamber had gone silent enough that the whole of it heard, and Harry had decided to say it in the open precisely so the whole of it would. "I worked that out days ago. You're too careful. Every line that should reach you stops one man short because you built it that way, and the law needs the line to reach all the way, and it doesn't, and it won't. You're going to walk out of here a free man." I want to say that out loud so nobody thinks I don't understand it. He looked up at the pale, composed face. "But you came here this morning to take 7 seats off a child, and you're going to leave here having lost the majority your whole world was built on, in front of everyone, and every lord in this room now knows that the convocation was real and the votes were corpses and your name was the one that never quite touched the paper, which means from today every single one of them is going to count the way I count because you taught them to by losing. You didn't need a cell. You needed them to keep believing you couldn't lose. That's the thing I took, not your freedom, your usefulness. A man whose threats turned out to be empty is a man nobody flinches from, and a man nobody flinches from has nothing left to sell." He paused. "You gave me 14 days. I gave you back the rest of your life as a man everyone has stopped stepping carefully around. I think that's a fair settlement. The bank would call it balanced." For the first time since Harry had met him, in the marble corridor a lifetime and 3 weeks ago, Lucius Malfoy did not smile. He looked at the child at the bottom of the pit with the 7 rings on his hands, and something passed behind the pale eyes, and then he rose and gathered his cane with the silver serpent and walked out of the chamber without being dismissed, which was the only move he had left that looked like a choice, and the doors closed behind him, and the block he had built did not follow, because there was no longer a block, only a number of cornered men sitting where a block used to be. Then there was the vote, because there is always, in the end, a vote, and the whole of it had only ever been about the vote. The matter on the floor that day, set long before Harry was anything but a rumor, was the renewal of the Office of Wartime Continuance, the temporary office created in the last war to hold the emergency powers, the office that held the levy of his own House of Caradoc, that renewed the emergency every year for the good of the body, that had kept a finished war alive on paper for a decade because a managed emergency is the most profitable weather a government can have. The block had meant to make it permanent. It had the votes before, it did not have the votes now. The renewal had looked a month before like the safest business of the session. The Office of Wartime Continuance held powers the ordinary lord was too wary to examine, and so the ordinary lord had taught himself not to examine them, and the block had counted on that incuriosity the way it counted on everything, a habit in the robe of prudence. But the corpses were coming off the roll today, struck at last after 2 centuries, and 7 living votes were going on in their place, and the marsh had spent the whole morning watching a wall come down stone by stone, and a marsh that has watched a wall fall does not put its weight on the men who built it. The roll was called. The pooled vacancies were struck from it, all of them. The corpses retired at last to the silence they had been owed for 2 centuries, and the chamber felt smaller and truer for their going, the way a house feels when you finally throw out the furniture of the dead. The living lords voted, and the marsh, reading the new weather, went where the weather went, and it was close, because the marsh hedged as the marsh always did, and it came down in the end exactly as Marchbanks had told a child it might in a cold front room weeks before, to a tie. The count hung there a moment, 50-odd votes split clean down the middle, the oldest stalemate in the oldest room in the world, and the chamber went quiet in the particular way of people who have all just done the same arithmetic and arrived together at the same edge. It was the place Marchbanks had drawn in the dust of a cold front room weeks before, with the tip of one finger, while a child watched and saw, before anyone else alive, exactly where the sum would end. A tied chamber, a casting vote. And the casting vote, by a law 4 centuries old that being read aloud a fortnight past had reminded them all still lived, belonged to the house of Peveril. And a tie was broken by the first voice. Marchbanks rose, as regent of the voice of the 7 houses, and the chamber understood what was about to happen, and a stillness came over it that was older than any of them, the stillness of a room about to watch a thing it had not seen in 400 years. The house of Peveril, Marchbanks said, holds the casting vote, and its lord is present, and though he cannot in law cast it with his own hand until his majority, the law is equally plain that the regent casts as the lord directs in the lord's hearing in his own words. She looked down into the pit. Lord Peveril, the chamber is tied, the casting vote is yours, direct me. Harry stood at the bottom of the oldest courtroom in the world, 8 years old, in a dead lord's robe taken in by an old elf's hands through a long night, with 7 rings on his fingers and 50 lords leaning down out of the dark to hear what a child would do with the deciding voice of their whole world, and he did not make a speech, because the moment did not need one, and a speech would only have been for him. The office of wartime continuance was made for a war that's over, Harry said. It's kept the war alive on paper for 10 years, so a few people could hold powers that only make sense in a country kept jumping at shadows. That's not continuance. That's a man refusing to put out a fire because he likes how warm his hands are. My house of Caradoc holds that levy, and it was taken during the war for the duration of the war, and the war is done, and I'd like it back, and I'd like the emergency to actually end, the way emergencies are supposed to, so that the next time someone tells this country the enemy is at the gate, it'll be because the enemy is at the gate and not because somebody's rent is due. He looked up at Marchbanks. Vote it down, end the office, cast the Peveril vote against the renewal. The Peveril vote is cast against renewal, Marchbanks said, and the measure fails. And the oldest courtroom in the wizarding world, which had been run for 200 years on the votes of the dead, was decided, for the first time any living lord could remember, by the single living voice of the youngest person in it, and the thing that had been built to make a person feel small had just been moved all the way by a child who had been small his entire life and had finally found the one room where that turned out to be the qualification. For a heartbeat no one moved. Then the chamber did a thing it had not done in the memory of anyone present. It broke into real and disorderly noise, not the orchestrated murmur of the block, but lords on their feet, some shouting, some only standing, the posture of people who had known for years that the room was rotten and had never once, until this morning, watched anyone throw open a window. The torches guttered in the draught of it. High in the dark tiers a single cracked old voice, one of Marchbanks's own kind, the principled fools who had voted their conscience and lost for half a century, called out, "Hear, hear," astonished at itself, as though the words had been waiting in that throat since before Harry was born for a vote worth spending them on. It did not all resolve in an hour, because nothing real ever does, and Harry distrusted endings that arrived too neatly, having spent his life on the wrong side of stories that other people had decided were finished. But it resolved. The office of wartime continuance was dissolved, and the Caradoc levy and the power to raise and end an emergency returned to a house that could not exercise it until its lord was grown, which was, Marchbanks observed dryly, probably the safest place for such a power to sit that the chamber had managed in 2 centuries. The ending of the standing emergency rippled outward in ways Harry would not see the whole of for years. Powers that had been temporary for a decade lapsed within a week, and the people who had grown comfortable wielding them discovered that comfort is not the same as right, and a handful of careers built on the permanent crisis ended the way such things end, with a resignation reported on an inside page. The hidden world did not turn just overnight. Harry kept no illusion that it would, having spent too long on the wrong side of stories about justice arriving on schedule. But a chamber that had been run for 200 years on the votes of the dead now ran, however unsteadily, on the votes of the living, and a thing that runs on the living can at least be argued with, which is the most a person can honestly ask of any room full of power. The prophet, which 3 weeks earlier had wondered aloud whether a goblin scheme was robbing the wizarding world of its seats, printed Harry's face on its front page under a word it had not once used about him in all that time, which was Lord, and the hidden world, which loves a reversal better than it loves justice, decided overnight that it had been on his side from the first. Harry read the article and noted without surprise that the press could turn faster than the marsh. He did not let it reach his head. A crowd that cheers you for winning is a crowd that will jeer you for losing, and he had not done any of it to be cheered. He had done it because 7 houses had been made to look dead, and one of them was his, and a column that does not balance is a column that tells you something true about the people who keep it open. The cheering was weather, the ledger was the thing. There were letters after that, a great many of them, from lords who wished to be remembered as friends and lords who wished to explain that their votes for the dead had been mere custom, and a small number from people Harry's own age who had read the story and written to a child their size who had walked into the oldest room in the world and moved it. He kept the last sort and answered them himself slowly in his careful hand, because they were the only post in the whole flood that asked nothing of him but that he be real, and being real was the one thing he had been doing all along. The accounting Dumbledore had ordered ground forward under the bank's audit, and the bank, which never forgot which debts were its own, collected what had been taken from 7 vaults with the exact, patient, unhurried thoroughness it had promised, and the gold came home, and the goblin's oldest broken promise was set down at last, and somewhere deep in the mountain a ledger that had not balanced for 400 years balanced, and that, Vardak said, was worth more than the gold. Though he would deny having said it, the contract Harry had argued clause by clause in the Chamber of Ledgers held to its last word. The bank defended him and pursued his gold, and never once in all the long months of the accounting decided for his own good that it knew better than he did what he wanted, because it could not. He had seen to that himself at 8 with a borrowed quill, by binding the only ally he could find in the very chains he had braced against from everyone else. Vardak took to sending him the audited pages as they settled, with no note attached, which Griffook explained was the highest correspondence a goblin offered, an account kept honestly, shown to the one it concerned, asking nothing in return but that it be read. Selwyn was finished, his marriage fraud entered into the record by his own panicked mouth, his seat stripped and returned, his name a thing the chamber now said quietly. Pricklewill was removed from the registry, and the buried laws he had welded shut were dug up one by one and read into the light, which was, Harry thought, a fitting sort of justice for a man who had spent his life making sure the truth could not be found, to be made to file it. Burke kept his name and his business and his place, the first rat off the right ship, and dined out for years on the story of the merchant in a schoolboy's jumper. And Malfoy walked free, exactly as Harry had said he would, free and rich and ruined in the only currency that had ever mattered to him, which was the belief of other men that he could not be beaten. And Harry got a home. Not the cupboard, never again the cupboard. The guardianship that had been built on a single warrant and no hearing was undone in a week, once a lord of 7 houses with a goblin bank, and a Wizengamot regent asked the questions no one had been able to make anyone answer for 7 years. And the grey house at the end of the Forgotten Lane became his in-law as it had become his in blood, with Hespa keeping it and the goblins warding it and Marchbanks coming for Hespa's tea and pretending not to enjoy it. He was still a child, he still got tired and rattled and distracted by a self-stirring cup or a coin that bit. But he was a child in a house that was his, owed to no one, free of lien, with his name written true in a ledger at last, on the right-hand side of the page, where for 8 years there had been nothing at all. There was one more conversation, because the most dangerous man in Harry's world was not Malfoy and never had been, and Harry knew it, and so did the old man. Dumbledore found him after, not at the wards this time, but in the emptying chamber, when the lords had gone and the torches were guttering, and a child sat alone at the bottom of the great stone pit, because he had wanted, just for a moment, to sit in the room he had moved and feel how large it was and how small he was, and how those two facts had turned out not to be opposites after all. The old man came down the tiers and sat with no stiffness on the step beside him, so that for the first time they were at the same height, 2 people looking up at the dark together. "I surrendered the abeyance this morning," Dumbledore said, "before the seating. I wanted you to know it was done before any of the rest, so that you would not think I did it because I lost. The first voice is yours, free and clear. I have voted with another house's voice for the last time, and I find I am the lighter for being rid of it, which I did not expect, and which is the kind of thing one only learns by being made to set a weight down." "Thank you," Harry said, and meant it. "You were right about me," Dumbledore went on, looking up into the dark. "I told you in your cold front room that I thought too well of you to pretend we would end as allies. I find I was wrong about the ending and right about the rest, which is an unusual proportion for me. I am more often the reverse." The blue eyes turned to him, and the warmth was there, undimmed, and the steel was there too, sheathed, patient, and now, for the first time, openly acknowledged between them, 2 players who had stopped pretending they were anything but. "I buried your parents' will for what I believed were good reasons, and you have spent 3 weeks proving that good reasons held too long become the thing they were meant to prevent. I will not do it again, not because I have stopped believing I know best. I have not. It is the great flaw of my long life, and I am too old to mend it. Because you have shown me in a manner I cannot argue with, that a man who acts for your own good without your consent is only a gentler kind of the men you defeated today, and I would rather be your ally than your gentler kind of enemy." He paused. "There are still things we must speak of. The reasons you matter beyond your seats. They have not gone away because you have won a chamber. They are waiting, and they are patient, and they are not kind. But they can wait a while longer now. You have earned a while longer." Said it lightly, but he did not move to rise, and Harry understood the lightness for what it was, a door left open rather than a subject closed. Harry looked at the old man and felt, for the first time in the whole long affair, something he did not flinch from and did not need to render into arithmetic, which was the strange, wary, genuine respect of one person who will not be managed for another who has finally agreed to stop trying. "I'd like to know one day," Harry said, "the reasons. Not today, but when I'm ready, I'd rather know than be protected from knowing. I've had enough of being protected from things for my own good. It's the most expensive gift anyone ever gave me, and I never once got to refuse it." "When you are ready," Dumbledore agreed, "you will know and you will decide as you have decided everything else in your own voice." He rose, unfolding to his great height, and looked down at the child alone at the bottom of the chamber he had moved. "Good night, Lord Peveril." Of the houses of Peveril, Gamp, Folly, Ashton, Wilt, Sayre, and Caradoc, it is a great deal of name for a small person, the ghost of the gentle joke. I think you will grow into it. I find I would not have missed being here to watch, which, given how this began, is the most surprising sum of all. And he went up the tiers and out, and the doors closed, and Harry Potter sat alone for 1 minute more at the bottom of the oldest room in the wizarding world, the room built to make a person feel small, and counted in his head as he always did. 7 houses, 7 rings, 1 voice his own that he had refused to give away, a home with his name on it, a debt to a bank paid both ways. An old woman who would not lie to him, and a goblin who had bled for him, and an elf who had kept faith for 400 years, and a grey wizard upstairs who had finally agreed to ask before deciding. It came out even. For the first time he could remember, the ledger came out even, and Harry stood up in the empty chamber and went home, where the lights were on and someone was waiting and the door was his to open. Chapter 7 End.